total confidence. What's up, baby?
What's up, Josiah from Pondering Politics?
That's right, Econo Boy from Economy. I have no idea. By the way, I didn't know, just so you know, because I mentioned that we should talk about things that are in everybody's bailiwick. So obviously, you got to talk about the economy. That's your thing. I've got a Financial Times article that I'll pull up, and we'll do that at one point, and then you can dive into whatever you want.
Okay. What's the article about?
Spoiler: Joe Biden cuts Donald Trump's lead on handling of U.S. economy.
Oh yeah, because they pull it's like, who do you think will handle X issue better? Immigration, economics, abortion, and it's like all different issue by issue polling.
Right. All right. Is everything working on your end? Can you see chat? Austin?
Yeah, everything's working on my end. It looks like Hutch is having some trouble joining for some reason.
Could be because he's already streaming. Just pinwheels.
Could be it. I think it means he's just getting stuck on like a loading screen, basically.
Why would it do that? God damn it. Can you send a screenie of what it shows for you?
Wow, Econo Boy is too high. There's no such thing as my volume being too high, chat. Okay. My volume should be able to drown out everyone.
Is that he engages in histrionics. That's the problem.
That's a new word for me.
That's not true. What's funny is Hutch is like, his viewers are like, it's showing chat and showing stuff like that, but I think it may maybe because he's already streaming or something. I'm not sure.
He's an OG in the streaming game, so I assume he knows how to click a link and join a conversation, of course. So some actual tech issues, I assume.
Damn, they're saying that you're too. Why is it doing this? Okay, wait a minute. Let's try this. Try this link. I don't know why the link wouldn't work if it worked for you.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know.
All right.
Have you tried refreshing with Alt F4? That's a great suggestion, Dr. Imposter.
Hey, what's up, people? I'm glad we decided to pop on just a wee bit early. I think it must be because he's streaming. Okay, when you've ever used Restream, have you ever streamed separately in advance?
I mean,
beforehand and then.
Yeah, I've never tried to. I've never done it like simultaneously. So it could be the fact that if he's already streaming, it doesn't make sense that he would need to link his socials like for the automatic like joining, right? So maybe if he like delinked his socials and just try to join off the link if he's just gonna continue streaming. So. Oh, Edge worked.
He says give him 2 minutes. Edge
Interesting. Worked. Okay. Microsoft Edge in the year 20. Yeah, that's right. Avenger anime in the year 2024. That's what I was going to say.
Here's Pisco. What up, Pisco?
Pisco.
So we're waiting on our boy Hutch, the MVP.
What is that painting in the background? Is that a man in a leather mask?
Hey there, guys. How you doing? No, it's Batman.
No, so actually what's funny is he's lying to you. It is a man in a leather mask, and it's actually what Pisco does on the weekends. That's all I'm going to say.
It's Batman. It's famous.
Mm-hmm.
You guys should know that.
I'm sure they call you the Dark Avenger.
And comic book fans. What happened? This used to be a space of nerds.
Well, we can't see.
Yeah, I can't see it. Yeah, it looks.
Can't see the Batman ears.
You can see it. You can see it.
No, it looks like some sort of. Honestly, I didn't even think it was like a man in a mask. I thought it was Slender Man or something like that because like the
Slender Man.
Yeah, no, for real. Like the profile is completely indecipherable.
Listen, you're the guy with the bisexual lighting.
That's right. That's right. Listen, okay, it's not. I don't know if it is bisexual because I thought bisexual involves some sort of purple or pink.
Oh, you know what? You might be
I've got
right.
a blue or a teal here and orange.
It's very Kylo Ren.
That's
you know
right.
the scene. If you know, you know.
The supreme leader is wise, or whatever he says. I don't know.
Yeah, Josiah's his lighting reminds me of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Looks like kind of a water
what
versus
way?
fire.
Wind.
It's kind of a water versus fire situation going on here.
Yeah, the M. Night Shyamalan version.
Oh, yeah. The
Ooh.
ultimate adaptation, the superior version. It goes M. Night Shyamalan live Hutch. It's M. Night Shyamalan, Netflix, and then the animated series.
Followed by your paper cutouts that you play with at night.
Well, listen. The stress I'm under, I've got to have some sort of outlet. And if it's paper cutouts and action figures, so be it. I wonder why this is a problem for Hutch. The only thing I'm thinking is I believe he was streaming before joining. Like I came into this fresh. I wasn't streaming.
Your setup is sketch. It's like, I don't know if I have a virus. I don't know if it's like taking all my bank account details.
Yeah,
it's just a little. What are you talking about?
I gotta click a lot of links.
A lot of
to
links.
Get to this here situation.
You
a
stop.
lot of clicks.
Listen.
Maybe an executable or two.
If all I'm just saying is three wonks uses Restream. I use Restream. It's like a boomer, like catch-all. We got a multi-chat. We've got an option to screen share. We don't have to like. It's a whole thing, baby.
You know
it's
what?
A whole thing.
You might have a point. But it's the only thing.
But I do appreciate your social security number, by the way.
Yes,
really great.
It's a good number. It's good to have. You know, like those numbers that just roll off. You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-mm.
So, like for example, your social security number is. That's what we call social engineering, and you passed, Josiah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
thank you. Well, it helps. It helps that I was also multitasking. I'm trying to pay attention to chat and keep an eye on for Hutch himself. God damn it.
Like if there's multiple twos, I like that in a number, like a phone number, like 522.
Okay,
that's a good ending number. Or if there's parallelism.
Well, how many twos are in
4545?
How many twos would you say are in your phone number?
At least one.
Is that right? Okay. Let's see. Okay. Hutch, you going to stream on the podcast or on the other's channel? Okay, so those of you who are in Hutch's chat, is he still successfully streaming at the moment?
I mean, apparently, right?
There it is. There he is. Damn, look at this stud right here.
We did it.
We did it, fellas. We
Beautiful.
have
I cannot hear them.
Yes, you can.
Testing,
we can hear you.
1, 2, 3.
We can hear you. All right, guys. This is we're 70% there. It's so good.
Hutch looks so nervous.
I have a surprise for when we're all here, and
we can hear you. Chat, tell Hutch we can hear him. The great thing about Hutch, though, is he's such a good debater. He doesn't even need to hear us. He just needs to opine.
Okay.
He just needs to.
Okay, I can hear you now.
Hey, what's up, man?
Beautiful.
I don't think.
Hey,
it looks like shit.
Hey, how we doing?
What do you mean it looks like shit?
What do you think he means, Josiah?
I love the candor.
He means it looks like shit.
It looks like absolute poo. I'll figure it out next time.
Oh,
I will have my full setup next time as well.
Oh, are you going like? That's right. This is your unveiling.
Look, my setup is
going
fully
full...
inspired by Josiah.
Wait, is this the full?
Right. Yeah,
is this
Josiah,
the first time?
He gave me. Yeah, not today. It'll be Sunday on the Three Wonks episode featuring Josiah, and then going forward on this show, obviously, I'll have my full setup, heavily Josiah inspired. I've got the background lights. I've got Josiah's camera that he uses. He recommended a camera, so.
What's funny is I can't wait for Mrs. Econoboy to see the face for the first time, because what you all don't know is if you actually look at Econoboy's wedding pictures, it's his beautiful bride, him in a full tux and a giant fucking blue E right over his face.
Did you guys like?
That's true.
exchange pictures before this? Is there some other chat that we're not involved?
New York internet.
Yeah, we exchange pictures all the time. He sends me his lowercase e. It was cutting out there. Hutch, can you do a quick test, like at length? Can you monologue for me? Can you describe?
Mic check 1 2. Mic check 2 1 2. Mic check check. Checkity check. His
audio sounds great. I mean, there's a bit of lag on the picture. What about you, Pisco?
Testing 1 2 3.
And now
hello.
There's a lag.
There's a lag.
All right.
We'll call this episode 0.
Yeah, okay, this is episode 0. Oh shit!
And there he goes. Oh dear.
Is that better?
Oh god.
How do you have bad internet, Pisco? It's like impossible.
Are you on Wi-Fi? You fucking Philistine. Plug an Ethernet cord in.
I'm just turning off all my other tabs.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm turning them off.
God damn it! Shut down Pornhub and everything else.
He's on
there.
Get the Joe Biden Wi-Fi.
Yeah, that's a good idea. He's on hotel Wi-Fi. Look at his room. It's clearly a hotel room.
Okay.
No, listen. It's his room / office. Again, that masked figure behind him is Pisco. That's Pisco's weekend job. So, all right. So let's take a look at some things. Better? Yeah, there's a bit of lag in your audio, but we can hear you.
We're going to run with it.
Yeah. This is episode 0. We'll just see what happens. So, all right. We don't have a name for this, but I thought, and Hutch did. Hutch and I were talking a couple of weeks ago about joining forces because we have a whole good cop, bad cop thing when it comes to taking on, people who would dare oppose God Emperor Biden. And Econoboy, of course, is a frequent partner of mine as well, and Pisco. So I was like, fuck, we should just put the Avengers together, right? Mm-hmm. Now, I'm Black Widow, obviously, all right? And I don't know who everyone else is, but I take the Black Widow approach. And we all have different, I won't say different skill sets, but certainly like different areas of expertise, especially like Econoboy and Pisco. You've got a lawyer and you've got an economist. And this is important because there are a lot of big news about the law and the economy. I think it's worth talking about. And we got 2 debate bros here, Hutch and I. So it's a well-rounded team.
I can tell you a lot about Call of Duty if you need information regarding that.
Are you good at playing Call of Duty?
Penultimate expert.
Fair to Midland.
Fair to Midland.
Yeah.
See, maybe that's another thing that we should end up doing is once we get the whole setup thing figured out is we play video. Oh my God, that's genius. Every now and then we have one dedicated episode where we talk shit and debate people, but we're playing a multiplayer game. I'll play Call of Duty. I love Halo more than Call of Duty, full disclosure. But do any of you all play shooters?
I was an OG Hutch fan back in the day. I in the COD commentator community.
Wow.
So
damn. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you make videos yourself?
There are the vestiges, I'm sure somewhere on the internet of 13-year-old Econoboy doing COD commentaries as inspired by Hutch. So
nice.
It's been a
while.
Link
me those. We can review them on the stream.
I do remember talking about politics in one of the videos. So
wow.
I was interested from a young age, but it's been a while. Since I don't know if COD, that's one of those spaces I kind of grew out of, but I can't imagine COD commentary is still a thing. Really?
I just want to interrupt real quick, just to let chat know. Pisco is returning, but he said he sent an all caps message. He says, "I'm restarting computer, stall for 2 minutes." So that's what we're doing now.
There we go.
Yeah.
The COD commentary scene at this point, it's just there's a few creators that have made a pretty decent living for themselves, and their entire content is just shitting on Call of Duty. So they play Call of Duty constantly.
Yeah.
But then they just shit on the game. And there's tons of angry COD players that consume this content every day.
My beef with Call of Duty, I mean, I haven't dedicatedly played that series in probably 10 years. My beef was it felt like they pulled out a new version of COD every 2 months. It was Call of Duty 4, then Call of Duty Advanced Warfare, then Call of Duty Modern Advanced Warfare, then Call of Duty 5. And that was in 1 year. Right? It was like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but for video games. Am I wrong? Am I making that shit up?
I think you're making that up.
I don't think I'm making that up.
They do annual releases.
Well, they do annual releases, but wasn't there a time when they would do like an annual release, but then they would do a remaster with the release. So maybe that's where you're getting kind of 2 in 1 year.
They did that 1 year. I think it was World War II or Infinite Warfare. They released a remastered version of COD 4.
There you go.
Why is there no Call of Duty French and Indian War?
It's a little niche, I would say. It's hard to gauge the interest for such a title. I can bring it up next time I talk to the COD devs.
I feel like, yeah, you've got a straight shot with them. I feel like that's worth mentioning. There are plenty of other wars. It's not just World War II. As a matter of fact, I feel like World War I very rarely gets any love. Maybe love is not the best word for it, but you know what I'm saying.
There is a game called Verdun where it's like full on trench warfare. But that was like, yeah, that was a game that Sark played. That was like 12 years ago.
Verdun, interesting. Is that
it's probably called Verdun?
Is it Verdun? Yeah. Okay.
I think honestly, that's the Dune Freudian slip there. Because now that I'm thinking about it, Hutch, correct me if I'm wrong, but haven't you and Steven been going back and forth about pro Dune and anti Dune?
Oh, he's just like objectively like really bad with his media takes, but it's fine because people accuse me of the same thing. But he just had like the worst. I don't know if it's Denis Villeneuve's failing as a filmmaker that he wasn't able to convey the story as it was in the books, but his interpretation of like what happened in Dune 2 was just so wildly off the mark.
Wow.
And I stand by that. Yeah.
He's not here to defend himself, so I suppose we shouldn't belabor the point.
Some people shouldn't have a right to defense, Josiah. Destiny's Dune take. That's probably one of those instances.
I felt that way once when, he was so pro-institution that he didn't want any changes to the core or to Congress, love the filibuster, but my boy is making progress, and therefore I think he has the right to spar with Hutch on pop culture. I think there should be an allowance made. Every time he's willing to let the Democrats be the Democrats, we should give him some allowance for his food takes or his pop culture takes.
Hey man, I'm just a big fan of pragmatism in politics and correct media takes.
You know who I'm a big fan of?
Hey, what a segue, baby. All right. Well, let's talk about that, because I feel like there's so much there really is a lot to talk about. Obviously, of the two major convictions within the past 2 weeks, convicted felon Donald Trump and convicted felon Hunter Biden. You also have new news about the economy that hopefully Econoboy can break down in terms of certain metrics. We saw polls which showed that there is a slow but positive trajectory of Biden closing the gap with Trump with respect to confidence in the economy. And then there's lots of Supreme Court shenanigans too. As a matter of fact, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse just proposed or reauthorized or renewed his take on Supreme Court ethics, reform, and it was shut down by Republicans today. And Attorney General Merrick Garland was officially held in contempt. I feel like we got a shit ton of things to talk about. So does anybody have a preference for which one we go with?
I want to start with a hot take.
All right.
And this is going to make a lot of the libs in the room pretty upset.
All right. Wait, hang on. Hutch, are you ready, buddy? Are you good?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right.
All righty. I think the Alito thing is a bit of a nothing burger. I'm just putting it out there. Mm-hmm. I put in that the flag thing. I put in that the recently released audio.
So this is one of the reasons why I like Restream is I can. I'm just kidding. Fuck you, Pisco. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So my take is, listen, I do not agree substantively with Sam Alito. I think he's my least favorite justice on the court. I'm not shocked and awed by these the release tape or whatever. I don't think we've gotten any more information. I don't think that it's an ethics violation to say he generally is in support of morally a Christian nation. I don't think he said that he wants to get rid of the Establishment Clause, even though you might get that from some of the rulings. And so I don't really see this as a humongous deal any more than some of the substantive decisions. I think if you wanted to criticize the court, you should look at decisions like Dobbs and other kind of substantive decisions recently. But the kind of flag thing and the stuff about the recording, it's kind of played out, in my opinion.
Well, okay. So here's what I'll say. I'll meet you halfway and I'll say I don't know if this is grounds for impeachment, what I found was that it was just alarming to me to hear somebody talk about the power struggle between the left and right as a zero-sum game. Am I saying that correctly? He said essentially the left or right like has to win. To hear a justice say that, and he said that to just some random person, like he's just so flippant.
I get that, Hutch. I respect that point of view. And let me tweak it a little bit. Don't you agree that between maybe not right and left, but MAGA and you might call normal Democratic, small d Democratic, it is a them or us? Like we can't actually coexist with this kind of mutant MAGA authoritarianism. So in that sense, is it like not also your opinion that we just need to win against MAGA? Maybe not the right generally. I think all of us kind of agree that the right should have maybe some place in the country in the discourse, but for MAGA, isn't that actually a true distillation?
Here's my, I can't speak for Hutch, but I do want to jump in here and say, yes, of course, I do think that in a vacuum, the fundamentals, or excuse me, the sentiment that Justice Alito articulated is not unreasonable. But I'm sorry, I do think, we talked about this before, I believe that Alito is civically and morally obligated to hold himself to a higher standard. So while Hutch, you and I, and Econoboy are free to articulate these things in public or in private, I don't think he should be. I don't think Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson or Sotomayor or Kagan should be. We've talked about this before. The system has created a total lack of accountability for Supreme Court justices. And as Sheldon Whitehouse or Jamie Raskins would say, in exchange, they are obligated to behave as apolitically as possible. We get to do that. We get to be as partisan, as petty as we want. I don't think they have the right to be. And if they want to articulate these things, I think that should come with certain controls and certain oversights, the way we would force that on Congress people, senators, or the president.
How would you seek to set policy around that, though? Like, how would you seek to constrict him legislatively or otherwise?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I do want to play a clip here from Sheldon Whitehouse and also AOC and Jamie Raskin talking about legislation that they're proposing. But I think the biggest one, mandatory ethics requirements for the Supreme Court of the United States. As Sheldon Whitehouse pointed out during a recent roundtable with the Democrats and the Judiciary Committee, he pointed out that even the president is subject to fact-finding and oversight. If there's like an ethics requirement, President Biden sat down and was interviewed by special counsel. President Clinton was interviewed by special counsel Ken Starr. And I'm sorry, but the president is more important than any Supreme Court justice. And if we can hold the president to this sort of scrutiny and standard, the same thing has to apply for a Supreme Court justice. There has to be an oversight body, that if there has to be a mechanism by which you can file official complaints against the justice. There has to be a fact-finding investigatory option. And there should be standards like, listen, if we have to interview a justice, so be it. You sit your ass in that chair and you answer the questions under oath.
So what is this? What is the standard?
That's Hutch's question is like, what is the standard and how would you enforce it? What's the penalty?
So that's where I think Sheldon Whitehouse's legislate. You'd have to do it legislatively. You'd have to pass. You'd have to create an ethics body, and you could do it. You could make it a roundtable or a body of retired federal judges or chief justices of various chief judges of various circuits. But it would be an oversight body for ethics. And then in terms of the penalties, it could range from fines. It could be mandatory recusals from cases.
What specific ethic would he have violated in your hypothetical here?
Well, I think in that case, it would be, I think to me, it's the section U.S. Code. I can't remember the code 255 or whatever about the impartiality of a justice. I think that's the violation.
Really? Which specific act do you think would make people reasonably question his impartiality?
The fact that he says, okay, that the U.S. should be restored to godliness, the fact that he thinks that he answered affirmatively when Lauren Windsor asked him, like, hey, do you think it's a question of the just defeating the left? And he says, yes, I think so. I'm sorry. These are openly political statements, and it's acceptable for senators to say that. It's not acceptable for justices.
Econoboy, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, honestly, one thing that I thought was interesting was that some of the leaked recordings were actually of Samuel Alito's wife. And I think that they actually absolved Alito, at least in part, on the flag issue, because it really does seem like Samuel Alito's wife has like a thing with flags and like putting flags up in her house and stuff. And she actually talked about how basically like Alito, she was like, oh well, he told me not to do it, but whatever, I guess I just did it anyway, right? And it's like, okay, well at least now we have some sort of record of Alito really not being cool with the flags being raised. Obviously it's his property, so he's somewhat accountable for it, but I would actually tend to the problem, Pisco, is that I think that it's fair to say if you're going to have special protections as a Supreme Court justice in the form of like lifetime appointments, I would argue like very little practical political accountability. And if we're going to generally hold the view that basically justices should be nonpartisan actors who try to, as a detached a way as possible, evaluate cases based on their sort of independently derived, judicial ethic or whatever, then I think it's fair to say that, hey, a standard is that you don't make, political statements or like adjacently political statements. Like, for instance, the example that I go back to is like Scalia, by my account, was actually pretty good about this as a justice. Like, whenever he was asked very pointedly political opinions, he would always say, I don't have public opinions on XYZ political issue.
Yeah.
I only have, what I think the Constitution, derives, basically. And I think that's generally the standard that we should hold justices to.
Do I think that Alito is a model for... Oh, wait. I'm hearing my...
You are hearing yourself?
Yeah.
Damn it. I hit the wrong button. I knew it. I knew this was going to happen. Okay, I'm sorry. I wanted to test it. Go ahead.
All right, testing now. Oh, we're good. I just see Econo Boy. Well, I see his E, which soon I will not be
You see his
seeing.
E?
There we go.
No, I do want to pour one out for the
Beautiful E.
For the E, which will no longer be gracing us. But to answer the giant E's question, I don't see Alito as like a giant model of ethics. I agree that I like Scalia more for a lot of reasons, and including the ones where he would always kind of be like, I don't have public views on abortion, on whether this should be legal, and the death penalty, all that stuff. He would vaguely allude to them, though. He would vaguely allude to being in favor of harsher penalties for criminal defendants, notwithstanding the fact he was on board on a lot of the major criminal defense individual rights cases. He was like often the 5 vote in favor with the liberals, saying that there's more expansive criminal defense rights. He would kind of vaguely allude to being conservative, and so do the liberal justices. I'm sorry to say, they kind of vaguely allude to it. Now the question is like, is this a vague allusion? Is agreeing to someone saying, godliness and this kind of dichotomy or whatever? Do I think that like it shouldn't have been said? Probably not. But like, is that the kind of level where I'm going to be like, imagine in that moment, if you had said, Mr. Alito, do you support Mr. Trump like I do? Do you think he would have said yes?
No, I think that if anything, of any ethic requirement that we could make in terms of justices should generally be apolitical, this is like definitely on the line in my view, in terms of, I don't know, would it be okay? Would it not be okay? Maybe not. So it would be, this is kind of the gray area for a rule like that.
Kind of boy, you know who the real villain is? It's
Joe
Lauren
Biden.
Windsor.
No.
It's Lauren Windsor.
No.
For the night before, being like, I have this breaking story. I'm like, oh wow. And then all these like lib accounts are retweeting it. Mueller, she wrote, everyone else, and they're like, everyone get ready, the news is about to drop. And it's just like, oh yeah, Alito's like a Christian and he's conservative. I'm like, okay, that's not news to me.
But I think that the reason why I think it's fair to say though that, again, I think for a long time, and I don't know, maybe this isn't true with past courts. Pisco, you know more than me, right? Obviously, in terms of the history of the court or something. I guess this society he was speaking to was the history of the court society or whatever the hell, right? So maybe they have some good information on this. But basically, I don't know. I think the general sort of rhetoric surrounding the court is that these people are not free of bias, but in general, like, they strive to be as apolitical and nonpartisan as possible. They're not in the limelight. They don't seek it out. They don't seek out political partisan statements or anything like this. They don't attempt to be partisans in nature. And certainly they don't attempt to give prejudgment on issues based on those things. And I think that this conservative court, pretty much, especially Justice Alito, I would say, has kind of taken that.
He's been a bad actor.
Exactly.
But I'm more like annoyed / alarmed when he's like talking shit about Prince William than I am about this recording. If I'm being frank, when he like gets on stage, he's like, the Duke of
Yeah.
whatever is talking shit. Like that was more. Oh my god.
Hey,
what are
like
you
the
doing?
most American thing you can do is shit on the British royal family.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
it's actually, I think it's encouraging for him to shit on monarchy as he's currently contemplating a way to sneak it in for Donald Trump with absolute presidential immunity. But I'm gonna focus here. Like old Scotty brings up a point. Josiah, it's not some random statement that a justice makes. It's a compilation of different pieces that have to be looked at. And again, not to beat up on Pisco here, and I do want to play some clips that we can react to on this issue, which is, again, at the end of the day, I categorically reject, and I will be forever unmoved. Like this, there is nothing that anybody can say that will ever move me off this. The Supreme Court is not meant to be the most powerful branch, and I do think in many ways it is. I also do not believe the Supreme Court justices are entitled to the same sort of partisan expressions and openly political expressions that we allow other representatives to make. I think going back to what Econoboy said, in exchange for the accommodations and considerations that they're afforded, lifetime appointments, very little by way of oversight, you have to be better. You have to be better than the president. You have to be better than Congress people. You have to be better than senators. And if you're not, then I get to impose my will on you the same way I get to with the president and Congress and everybody else. It is truly a transactional relationship. They've not held up their end. So why the fuck should we hold up ours? And that's why I fully support Raskin and White House proposing this legislation. And hopefully we will win back majorities in Congress, and even President Biden, who's a staunch institutionalist, hopefully even he's like, you know what? Yeah, some of this stuff needs to be tweaked a little bit. And we can finally have the constitutional standoff that I'm looking for, where we get to tell the court, like, actually, you guys are not the big dogs on campus. We have the army, we have the purse, and we're better and more powerful than you.
It just doesn't seem like a bit of a pie in the sky situation here. I mean, you would need 60 votes, right? So, I mean, it's just, well, I mean, unless you were willing to break a filibuster, but I mean, we obviously don't have that either. It's just, I with my politics, I prefer to focus on like what is practically possible in the moment.
Well, it's all, well, I mean, there's nothing.
Sing to me, Hutch, sing to me. Let's be clear. I agree with Hutch. Maybe there's some reform you can put in there, but, and I certainly wouldn't be in favor of expanding the number of seats on the Supreme Court. I think that there's plenty of precedent for that. I think it's time, and given the conduct of the MAGA Republicans, or I guess this is pre-MAGA Republican land. This is Mitch McConnell land. And then again with Amy Coney Barrett, I guess, to be fair, in 2020. I would be in favor of some legislation. But when you start talking about this constitutional showdowns, no, man. I think that we need the federal judiciary to act as a bulwark against excesses by the other branches of government. And I'm okay, with there being some rulings I don't agree with. And I think the solution to that is political. We need to elect presidents who are going to nominate justices who are better. But when you start talking institutional about taking away the power of the Supreme Court, that sounds like Netanyahu. That sounds like Trump.
But I didn't say, but with respect, I didn't say that. I'm not saying that we abolish the court. I'm saying that the court I'm sorry. There's no constitutional scholar on earth that will say checks and balances are imposed by the court and not against the court. They are subject to checks and balances to the other two branches. And they're the ones. Alito said to the Wall Street Journal a year ago that he doesn't think that the court has the power that Congress has the power to check the court. That's insane. That is a spoiled, ridiculous, constitutional, historical sense of entitlement. To Hutch's point, is it pie in the sky? Yes. But we also are in divided government. So anything other than keeping the lights on is pie in the sky, as long as Republicans have any sort of control of Congress or of the government. And the last thing I'll say is that we've got to figure out a way to rebalance this court, because remember, they're the final check on this. If we pass a law, if we pass a law codifying road protections, they could strike it down with judicial review. At the end of the day, we do have to do something about this court. It's not enough to just retake Congress and to win back the White House. You all agree with that, right?
I think I agree. I mean, I think that is going to take momentum. I just don't think the political will is there right now in the electorate to do serious Supreme Court reform.
Yeah.
When we look at polling, there's not a ton of support for expanding the court, for example. And to be honest, I'm quite frankly, I'm a little bit hesitant. I mean, that is like just like getting rid of the filibuster. I mean, these are two things that I can understand both sides of the argument, and I'm definitely wary of doing both of those things.
Do you all hear something wrong with his, is his voice popping?
Yeah, for
it's
me.
Popping.
It's
popping good. Yeah. Well, what are these clips you wanted us to watch?
Yeah, so let's take a look here.
I should say.
What about now?
No, it's still popping. I don't know if something was bumped or whatever. It was perfect until you started to respond.
Oh,
goodness.
Okay, hold on.
Okay, well, he's messing with that. We'll play this clip, and I have it at 1.25 speed.
So we are faced with an increasingly urgent question. What can be done about this out-of-control court? Well, today, Democrats in the House Oversight Committee held a roundtable on the ethical crisis in the Supreme Court. I should note that one of the expert legal witnesses there was my wife, Kate Shaw. Leading that panel was Maryland Congressman Jimmy Raskin, the ranking member of the Oversight Committee, and New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the vice-ranking member, and they both join me now. It's good to have you on.
Thanks for having us.
Congressman, I'll start with you just about what the agenda was today to convene this. Obviously, you can't call hearings yourself as a ranking member and not the chair, but what were you trying to do today?
Well, the Oversight Democrats wanted to respond to the national clamor over this crisis of legitimacy at the Supreme Court, and
I'll also say, if any of you want to interject at any point, just let me know and I'll stop it. So we can do this in real time. We don't have to watch the full thing.
we analyzed the ethics crisis. We analyzed the political crisis around confirmations that got us into this, and the blockaded confirmations of people like Merrick Garland, who was nominated by President Obama to the court. And then we began to talk about what sorts of things could be done, both in the specific case of Justices Alito and Thomas, and then generally about the ethical collapse at the Supreme Court. It's the highest court in the land with the lowest ethical standards. These are the only governmental officials in the land who are not governed by a binding ethics code. There's no process by which we can hold any of them accountable. And so it violates the essential principle that James Madison identified as the heart of our justice system, which is that no man can be a judge in his own cause. So we began to explore different avenues of holding them accountable.
Yeah, Congresswoman, you said something towards the end of the hearing.
Can we pause right here?
It just cannot
Absolutely.
be the case. It's sort of
Hold them accountable for what? So on the one hand, I understand the Thomas ethics, like non-disclosure, but what do you guys think the penalty should be? Do we think that we want to impeach for a high crime and misdemeanor for these non-disclosures? Do we want to, remove the funding of the Supreme Court or strip them of jurisdiction? If what has been done is so severe from Thomas and Alito at this point, I understand it's problematic. I'm keeping my eye on it. I think that all the scrutiny is a good idea. I'm glad we have reporters that are looking into this and tracking down the lies and cataloging them. But at this point, what would your guys' punishment be? What would you want the sanction to be?
Well, first of all, is my mic still popping?
It is popping.
It's popping to me, but maybe not to the audience. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and it doesn't, because I can still make you out fine as long as the audience doesn't think you're popping. I don't care.
Yeah, if everyone,
well, they were saying popcorn voice in the chat, so I think they hear the popping as well.
Maybe refresh it.
Yeah.
Okay. 1 second.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from my perspective, I would just say that, well, certainly it's the case that if we had an ethical code, there would be degrees of violation of that code, right? And so we can imagine an ethical code with extremely egregious violations, and then an ethical code with relatively minor violations. There's a difference between not reporting a $20 gift basket that somebody gave you at a conference.
Hang on 1 second. Can Hutch test?
Check, mic check.
Way better.
Oh, that's
way better.
good,
I'm
yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to touch my mic. Sorry, go ahead.
Don't look at it. Don't touch it. Don't even think about it. All right, go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to say, there's a difference between, not reporting a $20 gift basket and, having literally millions of dollars of gifts bestowed upon you, like Clarence Thomas, right? Where I think
$4 million. $4 million.
Yeah. At that point, getting removed from the court, I think would totally be on the table. Now, to be fair, this is proactively the case. This is not proactively the case, because I don't know how we could hold Clarence Thomas to an ethical standard that wouldn't have existed until presumably this gets passed. But just on a go-forward basis, obviously, that would be kind of, the punishment would range from a fine to getting removed, at least in my world. So.
What if for something really cool, like Beyonce tickets, or water ski? Maybe exemptions for.
So Convoy, in case you're curious, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson received Beyonce tickets as a gift, which she did disclose. Number one, and number two is not valued. I know Beyonce tickets are expensive, but they're not $4 million. Okay, but again, your point's well taken. I have no doubt that these ethical trespasses can be made by the liberal justices. They tend to be morally superior than their conservative counterparts, I would argue, but they're not infallible. But that's the whole point. This should be imposed on everybody. It's kind of like how I told you, Pisco, that I am concerned about the notion of presidential immunity, even though my president is the one in office. I don't want anybody to have that kind of power.
I respect that, but that's why I think Raskin is playing a little fast and loose. And I generally like the guy, and I like AOC. But when he says, this is the only office in the land not subject to an ethical standard, that's not
true.
What he's talking about is I guess some kind of enforceable standard by automatically by some body, but they are sort of held to the same standard as any officer in the United States. They're held to the standard of Congress and oversight by Congress. Number one.
but a toothless code.
Okay, but think about this. Think about the Attorney General today. This will, I guess, dovetail into that topic. The Attorney General of the United States is refusing to comply with the subpoena from Congress. Now, we think it's on good grounds because there's a genuine claim of executive privilege here. That wasn't the case with like the taxes of Trump or whatever. So you and I think that this is BS and this is MAGA Republicans being MAGA Republicans. But take that same frame to the Attorney General. The Attorney General, who just prosecuted and sent to jail Steve Bannon and others for the subpoena issue, decides unilaterally, without any other body like looking and making sure in an enforceable way, that he gets to decide when and when not to comply with subpoenas and when not to enforce them.
But Pisco, you know that there's a difference there. Number one, Steve Bannon tried to assert executive privilege and President Biden said no. And it's Biden, not Bannon, who has the authority to do it. Biden pulled rank. He had every right to do it. And executive privilege is a perfectly valid exercise. That's a check and balance. And there is redress, which is Republicans should take it to court, right?
No, I understand. Well, I understand that, but like the Attorney General of the United States, I'm just talking structurally. The checks on the Attorney General and the checks on other officers in the United States, a lot of times they are kind of emperors in their own realm, and they're subject to the discretionary like firing of the President of the United States or impeachment. And those maybe the firing doesn't exist, by way of the Supreme Court justices, but they're still subject to that check. And if Congress really wanted to, if there was something egregious enough, they could cut funding or strip jurisdiction. The question is, has something drastic enough happened that would require, in your mind, some kind of drastic measure against Alito, Thomas, or any other justice?
Well, for example, could Congress set a specific amount that judges are allowed to?
Popping again. I'm sorry. His
Fuck, okay, let me refresh it again. Hold on.
What the fuck? Hutch is cursed, man.
Like I think Pisco, he's only saying this because when he becomes
Mic check.
Yeah, you're working perfectly, baby.
Great.
Okay, all right.
I was gonna say
you looked at it. Hang on, I'm sorry. Well, Hutch was about to say something, and he looked at his mic and cursed it. I'm sorry. So Hutch, go ahead.
No, I adjust the level in my OBS, and so I think it fucked with it. So could Congress, for example, pass a law that would set limits on how much?
Again. What happened?
Hutch, do you have like a cell phone by your
Yeah,
cord?
I'm so
maybe.
stunned. No, wait. You sounded fine there.
Mic check.
It was the cell phone.
Yeah.
Mic check. I moved the cell phone.
Yeah.
Are we good?
We're good.
We're good.
Okay. All right, let me try that again. Could Congress pass a law that could like cap the amount of in-kind, what do you call it? Donations or whatever?
Gifts. Yes.
Yeah,
and actually,
like,
they talk
or
about
what?
it in this clip. They do talk about it in this clip that they want to impose a $50 gift limitation
Or
as part of this legislation. We'd have to take a look at the legislation.
I know, but
asshole.
but the question is going to be, or what? Like, if you don't follow that, what? Then you like some ethicist or some philosopher?
You do like the NBA and you suspend them for 20
suspends
opinions.
them?
That's right.
Who's the who?
No, I'm just fucking around.
That's
I don't
what I
have an
mean.
answer to
Like,
that. Yeah.
the whole point of keeping the judiciary independent is to prevent the kind of political, issues of the day. And obviously, in the realistic sense, and Josiah, I'll give you this, it infects it in other ways. And these are political actors to some extent. I'm not going to deny that obvious reality. But the question is how much and to what degree. We're practical people here. And I'm scared if you put that in the hand of like a philosopher king who gets to decide when the philosophy has been breached or the ethics have been breached, who's not directly answerable to the people. That's
You're right.
weird.
And wait a minute. That's terrifying. You know what? That is terrifying, Pisco. I want you all to listen to what Pisco said. The notion of a philosopher king, unaccountable to the people, making decisions from on high.
No, but you
what if there are 9 of them, like the Nazgul?
You missed the last proviso there, that are not answerable to the people in some way, or at least there's a connection to the people. That is, the president who was voted in nominated them.
The legislation that would codify an ethics code and an enforcement of that ethics code would be advised by the people as well, right? Through the deliberative legislative process.
Sure, but to the extent that it would contravene the Constitution, which says that judges hold their tenure for good behavior, then I would not be in agreement with it.
Well, why, for example, is it not weird for us to have a conversation about imposing, passing legislation that would restrict Congress people's ability to trade stocks? Like, we have that conversation like it's something that could happen, And this seems like a similar limitation that we'd be putting on the judges. What's the constitutional rationale that they're different?
I think that you would be talking about imposing like criminal fines or civil penalties and like some monetary amount, or to like jail or something, or say that it's a crime. That sounds like what you're talking about, right, Josiah?
I'm sorry, I was reading chat. Could you repeat that? I'm so
yeah,
sorry.
it sounds like
Well,
what's being proposed is like, because I don't think you're saying that you should have them be removed, because that, I think you guys, I don't know, do you agree or not, that it would violate the Constitution to have some separate mechanism for removing a judge, a federal judge, other than impeachment?
Well, you're the lawyer.
Yeah,
Oh,
but listen. Okay,
You're the
right.
legal expert giving
I'm
legal
not an
advice.
expert.
are.
I am
He
not
is-
an expert.
He says he's not
It's
an
free,
expert.
It's free legal advice. He's just being bashful.
No, he's
Don't
he's
listen.
actually billing us right now. So you guys don't know this, but Pisco mentioned in the email, he's like, listen, if we're here for an hour and a half, 2 hours, here's my hourly rate. Clock
Yeah.
starts. Every time
I
you
thought
had to
it was-
refresh your screen, Hutch, that clock didn't stop.
Yeah, I thought it was fucked up, but I went along with it.
But so in
yeah.
all seriousness, but like, listen, I take your point that there may be some penalties which contradict the Constitution, right? So I don't know if it would be constitutional to say that short of high crimes, misdemeanors, treason, or bribery, that you could ever impeach and remove a Supreme Court justice, even for the most egregious of ethics violations. Perhaps that's true. I'm fine. But what I'm not fine with is the status quo. And I don't want to hog all the time, so I know Conaboy was going to say something after Hutch, so if he wants to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm truly not sure if the Constitution basically in any explicit way says that the only way that you could remove a justice would be through the sort of formal impeachment process. Because I don't know, I feel like we have a history of prosecuting members of Congress in different instances, and it feels like it's sort of ordinarily understood that if you're a member of Congress and you get put in prison, that you kind of aren't a member of Congress anymore. So I don't know if the same understanding could happen for Supreme Court justices. But if it couldn't, then yeah, the penalty would be restricted to, really high fines and things like that. Basically anything except for getting removed from office, which I think would be appropriate. It's like, well, hey, if you're a justice and you accept millions of dollars in undisclosed gifts, well, we can fine you like $5 million and bankrupt you, essentially, right? I mean, that seems reasonable. So
May I play some of, because I have not heard any of this. This is Sheldon Whitehouse today. He's basically the most outspoken champion of judicial and particularly Supreme Court reform. He uploaded this video to his channel today. Apparently Republicans blocked his latest attempt to put forth legislation about Supreme Court review. So again, I'm playing at 1.25 speed. We don't have to listen to the whole thing. If anyone wants to interrupt at any time, just let me know.
Thank the chairman of our committee for attempting to bring this bill to the floor and to get us on it, even though the Republicans have objected to Supreme Court ethics. It's important for us to continue to make the effort because the American people understand that there's something gone very wrong at the Supreme Court. The objections that we just heard amounted to a long excursion through a great variety of topics, through abortion, through past FBI investigations, through allegations about a two-tiered system of justice, through wokeness, through things we all agree on, like separation of powers and an independent judiciary. I think it'd be helpful to actually come into focus on what we're actually talking about here, because most of what was said in opposition to this bill is completely irrelevant to what we are seeking to achieve. We all accept the doctrine of separation of powers. Senator Blumenthal, who is here, is an expert in the subject. He's argued more cases in the Supreme Court than any other senator. To be clear, our bill does not make the Supreme Court subservient to Congress in any respect. The bill obliges the judicial branch of government to create its own ethics enforcement mechanism that will be run within the judicial branch of government by the judicial branch of government. There simply is not a separation of powers concern when the judicial branch of government runs an ethics program for the judicial branch of government that is administered.
So he's not proposing
within
like
the judicial
automatic fines or impeachment. He's just trying to enforce the Supreme Court's own system of ethics, right?
He wants to pass the law to make the judicial branch regulate itself in a sort of actual sense in a way where there's a process to actually have some imposition of something and to actually review these cases more than what they're doing now. But it's not, he's saying you avoid the separation of powers problems that I've been bringing up by making it entirely run by the judicial branch. But if that's what's going on here, then I guess Josiah's underlying structural critique, which relies on this inherent wrongness of the branch regulating its own conduct, falls away. I mean, like, this doesn't address what I thought was your main issue, Josiah, which is the kind of self-regulation.
Well, it does, but also, if you recall, when we talked about this a couple of times, even last year, and I initially, Senate Democrats were proposing, if you recall, that the Supreme Court come up with its own binding enforceable code of conduct. They basically said, we'll give you first crack at, at the title, or shot at the title, bite at the apple. I think that's perfectly reasonable to say, listen, we have the right to impose our will on you as a form of checks and balances. We're the Article 1 branch. We are the, quote, necessarily predominant branch according to the founding fathers. We are the branch that can override all of your checks. You can override none of ours. I think it's okay to reassert Congress's supremacy there. But I think it's also fair to say, listen, hey, for just the sake of civility, we'll let you try to handle this first. But it is a problem, and you must handle it. And that's when they offered, finally in November, this toothless, unenforceable code of conduct, which the justices still routinely violate. You're supposed to make a public opinion over your decision, for example, to recuse or to not recuse. They don't do it. Clarence Thomas and Alito have violated that even after the adoption of this code. So again, I don't have a problem with that for Senate Democrats saying, we're going to pass a law which says you must do something concrete with a mechanism and enforcement. Otherwise, we're going to take a next step.
It seems like the problem here is that the mechanism in place would be impeachment. It's just, did the founders envision things being as polarized as they are right now? We already have a mechanism in place. I mean, like a functional Congress that would care about these kinds of standards might have already impeached Clarence Thomas for such an egregious act. It's just the question I was asking was like, did the founders envision like polarization reaching to the point where, you would acquit someone like Donald Trump or not even choose to impeach someone like Clarence Thomas?
No, of course, I think there's no evidence for that. Yeah, I think that if the founders, and of course, as a counterfactual, we can never prove, but I imagine they'd be stunned, for example, that a convicted felon is the one leading in the polls, given that, in many laws at the time, convicted felons couldn't hold public office. There's some things the founders didn't account for. But even like impeachment, for example.
Wait a second. I'm going to have to call a little BS. So I agree with Hutch that Madison, certainly as one of the framers, I think was trying to limit the effect of faction, which is partisanship. And he very much saw the branches as being countervailing powers against each other. Where today, as you're recognizing rightly, it's a party system where kind of the president or whoever the leader of the parties is like the presidential candidate, right? So it's a lot less inter-branch conflict and more inter-party conflict. On that front, I agree with you. But on this judicial ethics thing, like look at Marbury versus Madison. I mean, who is the the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court at that time who writes Marbury versus Madison? Marshall, right?
Oh, Marshall.
John Marshall, who was who? Well, he was the previous Secretary of State who never delivered the commission to Marbury in the first place. He's totally a conflicted party. He was involved in the facts. He's a fact witness to the entire proceedings of Marbury versus Madison. He doesn't recuse himself, and he writes this opinion, which a lot of it's an advisory opinion, and just issues it, and it's lauded as like the most important opinion in all of constitutional history. So like, I understand that these are issues that need to be sort of...
You know what, Pisco? You're right. Let me ask you something. Did the founders intend for the court to be above political influence, like from the other branches?
Yeah, they try to make an independent judiciary.
What if I remind you that the founding fathers actually changed the composition of the court for political ends multiple times?
Yeah, like that much is clear. I mean, if you just look at the period of time that I'm talking about, after the Adams administration, the Jefferson...
He tried to fuck Jefferson going in with the composition of the court.
And Jefferson closed that entire term for a year. The Supreme Court didn't sit by a legislative act. So I'm not here to tell you that the judicial branch and legislative branch are these hermetically sealed things. They can never touch each other. They never have touched each other. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying for us to like put into perspective what we're talking about here. I agree there should be better ethics. I might be even in favor of what Senator Whitehouse is proposing. What I want to caution people is I don't think that either Alito or Thomas, to my knowledge, have done anything worthy of them being removed from the Supreme Court, or even that they shouldn't sit and oversee some of the cases.
So to piggyback off of that real quick, I had a conversation with a leftist recently, and I asked him, what do you do 20 years from now? And I was making the case that he should support Biden because of the judiciary specifically. And I asked him, what do you do 20 years from now if President AOC passes Medicare for all and the Supreme Court that has been cemented with a second Donald Trump presidency, cemented conservative, rules that unconstitutional? What do you do? And his solution at that point was to just dissolve the courts. And I'm just like, I guess like I'm coming a little bit around to your side of the argument, Pisco, where you're cautioning against too much interference in that respect. And like his answer just really was kind of eye-opening to me. I don't want like most people thinking something like that. Like I do have some faith in our institutions still to protect against that kind of thing.
Wait, whose answer surprised you?
His leftist friend who said dissolve the courts if they try to touch President AOC's.
It didn't surprise me. It shocked me a little bit.
Yeah, but see, this is where I'm curious if we can even get close, like asymptotically close to a consensus here, because basically it's funny how this falls on factional lines. So Econoboy and I, it seems to be, I'm trying to steel man everybody's position here. We think that Congress and the president have more right to influence the court than you two do. And
I think they can do a lot. I mean, Congress can limit the Supreme Court's jurisdiction, and that's huge. They could pass a law if they wanted to limit the appellate jurisdiction with such exceptions as they could provide, maybe even to like hear any case. I mean, we haven't really tested the limits on it. I'm not saying they don't have the power to do it. I'm just questioning the motivation. I mean, really, what's the triggering incident here? Is this a bribe? I mean, you can't really connect the donations they're getting to specific official acts, can you? And is it an ethical problem? I think it is. I think more oversight.
So you're the lawyer. You tell me, is that how we look when we examine political corruption? Does there have to be proof of a quid pro quo or a bribe? Would we not invest? I guess what I'm saying is, so let's say that
it would be up to the discretion of Congress, right? Like much the same that they would decide whether something constitutes a high crime or misdemeanor.
So I look at the example again. Let's say that like right now Congress has a $50 gift limit. Anything over $51 they can't accept. Why do you think that that's the case? Why shouldn't it be unlimited? I can give you as much money as you want. You would just then have to prove the burden would be on you. If I give AOC $1 million, what's the problem with that? Unless you can prove that AOC did something corruptly in exchange for that $1 million. Why do you think these standards are in place? It seems to me.
I mean, I take your point. There are some campaign contribution limits that exist irrespective of any kind of back and forth. I just haven't seen evidence that anything illegal has happened. I support investigations. I support Congress looking in if they want to have some actual fact finding about this stuff. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying be careful with what we have already and don't make this the standard, in my opinion, so far based on what's been revealed for like removal. That's all I have.
Yeah, well, and I don't. Again, Econoboy, are you advocating? Because I'm not advocating that we boot Alito off the court or even Thomas necessarily. I'm just saying that I think that there have to be some checks imposed on this court.
Yeah, I mean, there obviously have to be some checks imposed on the court. I mean, it just, again, I take democratic institution building very seriously, right? And I think that obviously it doesn't, like to Pisco's point of, it's not clear to me that anything's illegal or even necessarily like strictly improper about all these gifts that like Thomas has gotten, for example. And you could say the same thing even about, in the debate that we had on Wix channel about the raising of the flags on Alito's properties as well. But the appearance of corruption can be just as bad as corruption itself. And again, that's the reason why you might have a rule that says you don't accept gifts more than this amount, because even though it might be entirely proper, like it's like, hey, maybe I just like AOC and I just want to give her some money. Who cares, right? It's not necessarily a big deal. But obviously the appearance of corruption can be just as bad as corruption in and of itself. That's why I often say to people who make the somewhat pedantic case of, well, actually, if you look at all these studies, it shows that money in politics actually has no influence on our political process. It's like, even if we could divine we could look through the eyes of God and know for a fact that money in politics is just like not bad for the political process, you should still support really strict regulation on money in politics because it looks bad, right? And I would take a similar view on these kind of gift scandals and things like that with the Supreme Court. So
Before we end the podcast, because AOC was in that clip, can we talk a little bit about AOC making that statement against anti-Semitism?
Yeah, no, we can talk about whatever you want. And by the way, I don't have a hard out. We can do it for another hour. I don't care. This is rough draft number 1. So yeah, switch topics.
Did you guys happen to catch that she
No,
was
I did
being
not.
brother?
Do you want to link it to me, Hutch, and I'll pull it up?
Yeah,
What is Hutch about to say?
she got shredded. I need to find. Hold on, let me find. She did it was like she streamed with like 2 people that were like experts in anti-Semitism, I believe, and she was responding to, there was this art exhibit in New York City that was honoring the people that were murdered at the rave in Israel on October 7th. And there was a huge protest outside of the art exhibit. And there were people showing up with Hezbollah flags and Hamas flags and cheering "Long Live the Intifada" outside of an art exhibit for people that were murdered, you know? So it's like, there's very few other ways that you can interpret that besides just anti-Semitism.
Is it this one here,
so-
Hutch? It's laughable. We can mobilize.
No, there was a video of her.
Oh.
Let me see if I can find it. She actually, hold on. I tweeted about it yesterday.
And
She
then just link
posted
it
a
to me
video
and I'll
and then
pull it
she
up.
just got lit up in the replies in the what account was it? Was on at AOC. Did she delete it? Did none of you guys see this?
I know. I
see it.
remember that she made a statement against anti-Semitism.
Here,
and how we
here.
Oh,
had
that's
to fight it.
cool.
Yeah.
Here, I found it. I'm
I'm-
gonna put
I'm
it in
also
my
against
chat,
that.
which is gonna show up in that chat there. It's that particular tweet. And if you look at the quote retweets, I mean, there were DSA people in there.
Can you
and-
send that? Can you send that in Discord? Because unfortunately, I can't click the link and pull it up here. And I'm
So this is the quote, right? The callousness.
Yeah. So she just basically, she spoke out against like anti-Semitism, and like that was, and there were clear instances of anti-Semitism outside. Like, I'm not going to say that everybody there was like anti-Semitic. I mean, surely we have to make a distinction between like anti-Zionism or like opposition to the Israeli government and anti-Semitism. But in that context, there was a guy, for example, that was outside saying something like, "I wish Hitler was still here," for example. So there were clear examples of like really egregious behavior, and she denounced that, and she got destroyed. It's just wild
Destroyed by whom?
to me. We'll call it the
Bunch of
cocaine
random-
left. Is that what we've called it before? I've heard Wick call it the cocaine left, or like the dirtbag left, like the Chapo guys.
Got it. Got it.
yeah.
So the callousness,
Twitter people.
dehumanization, and targeting of Jews on display at last night's protest outside Nova Festival exhibit was atrocious. Anti-Semitism, plain and simple. Anti-Semitism has no place in our city or any broader movement that centers human dignity and liberation. I mean, it seems pretty anodyne. I don't understand.
It is, and it doesn't. She's not all of a sudden now like pro Netanyahu, or like she's not all of a sudden now like pro Israel and how they've been like conducting this war. She's never wavered in that activism or in that kind of like advocacy. Just the second that she just denounced like clear anti-Semitism, these people lost their fucking minds. And I don't know. To me, it's just, I'm encouraged because I feel like she has definitely matured a lot in the last 6 years. So it's good to see her taking this kind of a step. It's a good thing that she made that statement.
I
think
agree.
it's important. Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's important, obviously, to denounce, any sort of bigotry when it presents itself, obviously, including anti-Semitism. And I'm not sure that I really don't know about this protest from some honoring, some memorial honoring, people who got killed on October 7th, obviously. But, I remember this was before the October 7th attack. I recall watching a city council meeting. It wasn't my own city, but I also can't remember what city it was, where they were debating, whether or not to fine pro-Palestinian protesters, because the way that this pro-Palestinian group protested against the occupation in Israel was basically just like going to temples and just being like, "We fucking hate Israel," like in front of every temple in the city. And obviously, well, guys, I mean, if anti-Semitism isn't anti-Zionism, it's kind of hard to say that when the way that you look at a Zionist and target them is, well, look at all those Jews going into that temple, right? I mean,
There was
obviously
also a
that's
group
not
that
good.
protested outside of a cancer ward, if you guys remember that. It was like a Jewish-run cancer
Can
ward.
I bring
So
this?
there-
Can I? We have a couple of people I think disagreeing in chat, or at least offering a nuanced disagreement. So we got Social Society with Brandon Clark, who's a up and coming content creator. By the way, he's got good videos. He says, "Listen, the problem with AOC's quote is that it lends credence to taking credibility away from the completely just reason people were protesting. You can't define the majority's message by the minority." What do you think about that?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think that that's what happened. I mean, if you see the statement, it's targeted towards a specific event that happened in a specific time and specific things that she saw. And to characterize AOC as being, I guess, broadly sweeping with a broad brush on the basis of a statement that related to things she saw that night, I think that's a little bit much of given her statement, given her voting pattern and other sort of things that she said on the record.
I think the part of his statement that I agree with is that I do feel like there's like a almost like reactionary squared type, portion of the left where it's like you'll see crazy people who are doing anti-Semitic things, like holding up swastikas or like, doing the thing that Hutch described. And I feel like the reaction to that will be, well, this is a problem in the left. Like the left needs to address this very deep, broad problem with anti-Semitism. And I just don't think that's true. Right? Like it's the same. I think of it the same way as when people said the left has a problem with violence. And what's my evidence for this? Look at the BLM protests. Look how violent they were. Obviously, I mean, was there a large amount of violence and destruction associated with BLM protests? Well, of course that's true. You can look at the videos of it. But I don't think anybody in the left at that time, this was in the summer of 2020, genuinely took the position of, this is a genuine problem, the left supporting violence and destruction of businesses, right? Because that was a ridiculous criticism. Yeah.
So, for example, like, do you think that the Republican Party should have disavowed Charlottesville, for example?
The Republican Party, should they have denounced what
as a party? Like, yeah.
100%, yeah. Why should they?
It's not about like, for instance,
so should the Democratic Party, denounce I'm not conflating all of these protesters with full-on anti-Semites, but it's very clear from some of the videos. It's like when you see somebody flying a Hamas flag outside of a festival, outside of an exhibit like that, like why is that being allowed?
Maybe I'm not understanding, Hutch. It does seem like you are trying to apply the same standard because people like Biden and others did denounce specific things that occurred at specific times. I would put into that situation like the Charlottesville protests were largely characterized by alt-right and hateful messaging. And I don't know, one of the problems with the Trump statement, good people on both sides, is not that it isn't true that there are good people on the right wing and good people on the left wing. It's that on that particular day,
it was a Nazi rally.
Where were all the good people on the one side, and where were right? So that is the question. And so I don't really have a problem at all with the Democratic Party people coming out and saying, hey, this was bad among these people. You don't have to denounce all Palestinian protesters who are not all like this. But just so you know, I personally denounced the in my own city, the Columbia protesters who were like storming buildings and destroying property and doing all that stuff because I think it wasn't the right thing to do. It's bad optically. It hurts the movement. And so I really think that it doesn't take away your credibility to call out bad things on quote unquote your side. It increases your credibility to do so.
Yes.
And just to be clear, my statement was agreeing and disagreeing with what he said, right? Is that obviously if a Democrat is asked, do you denounce the violence? Do you denounce all these businesses getting burned down in association with BLM protests? Well, obviously the answer is yes. I mean, nobody's in favor of just burning down random businesses, of course, right? And similarly, if you see an anti-Semitic act, of course it needs to be what do you call it? Denounced, right? And of course. And to the extent, and one thing that I just think is important to be clear is that the leaders of the progressive movement are people like AOC who are willing to call out things like this, who are obviously not anti-Semitic. It's not like there's a huge contingent of elected Democrats on the state level or on the federal level who are waving Hamas flags outside of memorials for October 7th supporters, right? That the overwhelming sort of moral center of the progressive movement is obviously in favor of denouncing anti-Semitism. And there's not really, truthfully speaking, there's not a place for like anti-Semitism in the progressive movement, at least not in a legitimate sense, right?
It gets tricky. Like what I've observed, and tell me if you guys agree, but what I've observed is that there's a hesitance from pro-Palestinian left-leaning individuals to acknowledge certain things because they think that it detracts from their advocacy. So if they acknowledge, the horrors of what happened on October 7th, well, in their minds, if you acknowledge that, it's a justification for everything that Israel is doing. And I'm saying it doesn't need to be like that. Like you can do what AOC is doing. You can be this tireless advocate for Palestinians, as she has been this entire time in Congress. She's been a really important voice for Palestinians in Congress. But she did a very sensible, rational, politically smart thing, if we're going to be cynical with it, by distancing herself from the more extreme elements of the movement. It's sad that they don't, a lot of people don't want to acknowledge the extreme elements. And I think that ultimately hurts their advocacy quite a bit.
To show that I understand, I think or maybe I try to understand where the quote unquote extremists are coming from on the other side. I understand why they get cagey around October 7th. I understand that. Part of it is because a lot of them think it's justified. And I want to repeat that. There are a lot of people who think those actions were justified.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear as day that when you see certain people who are unwilling to answer, who have made certain statements, it's clear what they're thinking. But imagine that you think that what's going on here is categorically a genocide, and that you think it's been more or less created out of whole cloth by the Israeli occupation. And if that is, and you're seeing it kind of in that power sense, in that structural sense that Israel is to blame for all this. If that's your view, I can understand them from their perspective, again, not adopting that perspective, that you're giving air to this, it's not as bad as this, and so why should we have to and then give air to this? Just like I think if you came to this conversation about, this is a very pro-Biden, anti-Trump podcast, I'm guessing, and someone started talking about the anti-democratic tendencies of the Democrats and Joe Biden, I think we'd all laugh and say, we don't even want to hear it. Maybe even there's a good criticism on regarding the left, but they just think and they feel that so much over history has been Israel's fault. I understand that, but it's not tactically the best idea.
Yeah,
even if that is your opinion.
So I've been quiet through much of this just because I've not seen the clip. I've just seen this tweet. I've not seen the protest. And I typically tend not to weigh in on foreign policy anyway, which is part of the reason why in a perfect world, we'd also have a foreign policy guru on here. But I will say, since you use the analog of election denialism or anti-democratic impulses, and I don't know to what extent this would apply here, but I'll tell you exactly how I react when that comes up, which is I refuse to contribute to a false equivalence. If you want me to condemn the one or two times that Secretary Clinton referred to Donald Trump as an illegitimate president, that's fine. But then 98% of the rest of my words, and I will force you to fight on this too, you being the opponent, whoever it is Donald Trump was objectively worse by orders of magnitude, and I will not allow you, nor will I contribute to a paradigm that creates parity between these things. Yet she shouldn't have called him an illegitimate president. Now, do you condemn everything that he did in the aftermath of the 2020 election? And so, again, I'm not sure to what extent that is analogous here, but just using myself as an example, that is.
You just concede on it. Yeah, I guess what you're saying is don't be Jedi mind tricked into defending something that's undefendable. And I would you say yeah, of course I condemn October 7th. It's awful. The problem is when you don't condemn it because you think it's justified. But I agree that the easier thing is just to concede the point and then get to the problem.
But also to not allow. And again, that's why I don't know how analogous this is here. I would concede, but I would refuse, again, using the Hillary example. We're not going to litigate this. I will make the concession, but I will not permit you to pretend in a conversation with me without extensive pushback that Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are equitable. Donald Trump is objectively worse, morally, intellectually, in terms of his threat to democracy. And anyone who suggests otherwise is a fucking loser. And that's exactly how I'm going to treat them. So again, I don't know how analogous this is, but I think that's important.
to add to what you guys are saying, I think it's the short way to say it is that I don't think you don't want to get so caught up playing defense, essentially, right? Essentially for your movement, right? Is that it's one thing to say the violence associated with BLM protests is bad, but it's another thing to literally only talk about how bad the violence for BLM protests is and never talk about the actual systemic critique that the overwhelming majority of BLM protesters were actually making in a peaceful way, right? That you don't want to get so caught up in basically being afraid that, oh, you don't want to be afraid to condemn any violence, but also you don't want to be so caught up in like, look, I'm one of the guys who's willing to condemn it. And, yeah, you're right. There's so much violence and it's horrible. And you end up losing the actual substantive, systemic, peaceful critique that the overwhelming portion of the movement makes. And so that's a balancing act. And it's not clear what the exact right way to do it. But
I just feel like if you're showing up to protest an art exhibit dedicated to hundreds of people that were murdered, I feel like at that point, there's a decent chance probably most people there felt like Hamas was more or less justified. Like, I don't know how else to read from that. So like, I would want to like distance myself from like all those people, to be honest.
Well, and that's why I said, like, from my limited understanding, this statement seems perfectly anodyne. And again, the lack of charity from the sounds of it that some people are giving AOC, like the body of her work, the body of where her objections are, she's publicly making her view. She's probably publicly made her views on this position consistently clear. She has publicly opposed President Biden and the more, I don't know if you want to call them Zionist elements or pro-Israeli government elements of the Democratic Party, not just with her rhetoric, but also with her votes. And so that's something else I feel like that has to be taken into consideration when evaluating the type
of the type of leftists who would say that AOC doesn't go far enough on her support for Palestinians is the type of leftist who is so far away from any real political power that it's difficult to give them anything more than basically just they're pretty stupid a lot of the times. I mean, you can't take them too seriously or too representative of the broader movement, right?
Well, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to just put in a word here. And I know, I think I want this to be heard that like, I agree that AOC's statement is in my opinion, offensive. And I think it seems targeted enough. I also don't think we should hear AOC to be saying everyone there at that protest was an anti-Semite or necessarily bad or just because. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I don't think she was saying that. She was very specific about she like the callous, as long as you weren't being callous or dehumanizing people or targeting Jews, then she wasn't talking about you.
Yeah, and I would think, and I just want to say that I don't necessarily, I definitely wouldn't be there on that particular day and protesting that exhibit if you took the view that what's going on now is sort of more slaughter, more needless death, and that I guess the calculus is that this is meant to, I don't know, make people aware or make people shock them into conscience or whatever. I don't agree with that tactic. I don't agree tactically with that, but I don't think it's fair to say that everyone, and I don't even think necessarily Hutch was saying that everyone who was there supported the attacks on October 7th. I think there are a lot of people there probably like, I don't support it, but what's going on in Israel is really bad.
Let me rephrase. I would say like the odds are higher that you would support October 7th if you were at something like that. I'm not going to say everybody there was, but I'm sure you would not have had trouble finding people that were like, it was like the Haitian Revolution or it was like the Polish uprising, et cetera, et cetera.
So something though that we've been touching on, I think in the broader sense is, so with AOC, you have somebody who, was a young activist, right? And she came into Congress as a firebrand. And we've seen, yes, a maturation of her rhetoric and her approach. Here's something that most people don't know. She is the vice-ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, which is probably the most powerful and important of the congressional committees.
Sure.
Right? Of all of the Democratic caucus, under Jamie Raskin, the ranking member, you have AO-freaking-C, which is a colossal endorsement of her ability. By the way, if you ever watch her question Republican witnesses,
she's sharp.
Like, dude, brutal.
She's super well prepped.
100%. And she has an encyclopedic knowledge of the rules, right? Probably second only to Raskin. And what's interesting is it's not her, but there's a freshman Democrat named Maxwell Frost, who's the youngest member of Congress. He's
also sharp.
Yes, very sharp. So I interviewed him on Pondering Politics, and we actually talked about this in the broader sense, which is like, listen, what do you think of the expectation now that you're on the inside, right? Because he was also, I think he was like state director for March for Life in Florida.
Yeah.
So, you know, he was a gun control advocate and activist from the outside. Now he's inside, you know, and we talked about how things changed for him, how the expectations changed. He also has various levers of power that he never had before, but he's also at the mercy of other people and levers of power the way that he wasn't on the outside. And so we talked about that tension at length, and it was really interesting because, you know, he did say, he's like, yeah, he's like, you need, I'm paraphrasing here, but he's like, you need both. Obviously, you need activists on the outside to continue to say, no, it's not enough. I need you to do more and push more. But that is impotent without people on the inside who get elected and reelected and work to affect those causes. And he said there's tension there. He's like, there are people in Congress, in the Senate and the House, who have gotten too far away from activism. I would use Dick Durbin as an example in the Senate, a feckless institutionalist to a fault. That's why I prefer somebody like Sheldon Whitehouse. And he's like, but also the activists have to understand that, you know, it's almost like they have to
they can't be pulling fire alarms. Now look at the polls, Jamal Bowman.
Right. Or they can't, they also have to have a basic understanding of civics in the sense, like one of the things that I get frustrated with as somebody who doesn't think that President Biden is perfect and doesn't think that the Democratic Party is perfect is this idea that Biden could snap his fingers and fix the world's problems. I'm sure, Hutch, you saw it because you tend to watch for these things. Do you know who Elie Mystal is, the progressive lawyer and whatever?
Yeah.
He responded to some person on Twitter. I think it was a relatively random person talking about if Biden does all these things, he would get reelection. Reparations for Black people, you know, and $20 minimum wage or whatever. It was like all these things. And Mystal, who is a progressive, an outspoken progressive, and a guy who wants radical change, particularly to the court, he's like, the president can't do this. It would be shot down here, like blah, blah, blah. And people responded with this like, oh, you're just a Debbie Downer. You just don't think that anything can be done. It's like, no, it's civics. There's
a thirst for authoritarianism in this country.
Wait. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I want to do a little pivot, but I want to let Hutch have his due because
it's all good, brother.
My little pivot is speaking about constitutionalism and separation of powers, and when you were talking about Josiah, and everyone's going to think I hate Biden after this podcast. I've been like the Debbie Downer this entire time, but no, I want to talk about something.
What are you talking about?
I want to talk about something electoral specific and something bad that I think Biden did.
Okay.
And that bad thing that I think Biden did, and I love Biden. I think Biden's one of the best presidents, if not the best president in my lifetime.
Sure.
But I have to call a spade a spade. And I don't know if it's going to help in the election. You guys will be the ones to figure that out.
Balls and strikes, brother. Balls and strikes.
But that is the decision to stop asylum applications at some arbitrary threshold at the border without any statutory authorization, like by executive order. I think that is a gross overstep of what's allowed under the law. I think it gives fuel to the fire of MAGA, who have been shouting for months, do more, do more, do more, you can do more. And he's essentially seeding that argument, which I think is incorrect. I think he doesn't have the authority to do so. Seeding that argument and saying, all right, I guess I could have done stuff before when I said I couldn't. And the best possible scenario, because Josiah, I see him right now. He's prepping like a tiger. He's perched up, about to pounce on me. And the best argument someone of you are going to say is, well, he knows it's going to be struck down. He's just pandering to make it look like he cares or something like that. And that's what I think you guys are going to say to me. Tell me I'm wrong.
No, so listen, okay. I was the pouncing, that was just pure sexual tension. That was the arousal I experienced when I look at you. Okay. It was not to pounce on your point per se. Hutch, don't worry about it. We'll get there, man.
Get back to that bisexual lighting.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm starting to be affected by the lighting. But so actually what's funny is I've had conversations about this and I did a video about it. I am torn on President Biden's executive order for precisely the reason that you gave. So to me, this is a very risky move because it is a tacit concession that the bad faith Republican talking points actually had a kernel of truth to them. They were saying for months, if not a year, Biden could snap his fingers, issue an executive order, and solve all these problems. And Biden was consistently saying, I cannot do that. Not that I can, but I won't. I can't do it. And so for him to then actually say, okay, just kidding, I can do it, that's extremely risky. Now, a couple of things. They are banking. They are obviously banking that the courts will do to Biden's EO what they did to Trump's EO, right? And strike it down. And then he can say he basically can get caught trying. But I think it's
That's
incredibly
cynicism, and that
Of
that-
course.
if what you're saying is
But-
you think the most likely situation is that they've calculated that he can use this as a kind of debate point in an argument.
Yes.
In which case they've calculated it's most likely what he's doing is illegal. In which case, subversion of law, separation of
But
powers.
wait a minute. So, but here's the thing. Well, listen. I don't know how strict you want to get here. I think the president issuing an executive order, which is struck down by the Supreme Court, I don't think you mean to imply that that's criminal, right? Because that's just
I'm not saying it's
yeah.
criminal.
Yeah.
But I'm saying it's cynical, and it shows that he thinks that there's a good chance, or at least he's banking on it, or maybe again, I don't know this.
Well,
to be the case.
the thing is that the polling supports it. That's where to me, and again, I've actually had privately this argument with Aaron with Straighter Aid, where I'm like, I don't think it's fair to say, because some of my more liberal friends who are, I would say, less progressive, like our dear friend IRI, I think he would say that this is a good thing, unambiguously, right? Others who are more progressive, like Aaron, would say this is atrocious. You shouldn't do this. I'm in the where politically, I think this is complicated. I think it's incredibly risky.
Yeah.
I think it's a contradiction of sorts. But the polling initially is bearing it out, Pisco. 70% support
But we are
President
a
Biden's
republic.
executive. No, I understand, but I'm talking about for the.
It's just,
the
there's a
political.
ton of political pressure. Like Josiah's right. It's not, and it's bipartisan too. So it's like when stuff like this happens, sometimes he'll do stuff and I just kind of detach emotionally from it. And I just try to understand why it happened. And I think that's where I'm at where Josiah's at, where it's like, there is a bit of realpolitik to this. And so there is a bit of cynicism, but to a certain extent, that is necessary sometimes in politics. So you just can't get around that.
Similar to the neoliberals on Twitter who talk about like, oh my goodness, I just wish that Biden would stop all this tariffs and all this nonsense. Like free trade's the best thing to do. It's good for democracy, this and that. I agree with all that, right? And similarly, I wish that we had a Democratic Party that was super strong on immigration, who said, look, immigrants are great. They're good people. We have problems with our asylum process, but we shouldn't demonize immigrants. And to a large extent, Democrats do say this, but Biden and Democrats in general seem to be caving to what is, apparently very real political pressure to do just anything, just something, right? That just looks audacious to try and stymie these asylum seekers. And so, unfortunately, I would agree with Pisco's legal analysis that it's almost certainly illegal, and a court that upholds the legality of this executive order is pretty insane, if you ask me, if that were to happen.
Especially in view of the student loan decision, where I actually think Biden was on firm ground. And I think going back to our Supreme Court conversation.
Don't get us sidetracked on how inconsistent the courts
I
are.
agree, but I just want to tell everyone, I think that, whether you support the policies or not, you might support, and I think that maybe something should be done. I supported the bipartisan legislation giving the emergency authority. I supported that because it was done the right way. That's why I'm voting for Biden, among other reasons. But it's because I think he tends to do it the right way, not just the right policy.
But the but that I was going to say was that, and it was one more sentence, was that unfortunately, for all those values-based and empirics-based reasons why, and legal-based reasons why this executive order is a bad idea, politically, it might just be a good idea, right? And that kind of overrules all the things that we mentioned. We live in a democratically accountable, the president at least, democratically accountable system, right? So sometimes those things will happen.
Yeah, so a couple of things I just want to say here, and then some people in chat have disagreed, and so I think it's worthwhile addressing this, is right now, whether we like it or not, immigration is a top polling issue, and due in no small part to Republicans hyping it up as an issue. And we know the history of the bipartisan border bill. They worked in good faith with the most conservative member of Congress with respect to border policy. And you had Chris Murphy, a Democrat, and you had Kyrsten Sinema, a Democratic caucusing independent who is also pretty conservative, right? So it's about as fucking tripartisan as you could possibly get, not even bipartisan. And yet we also know, cynically, in bad faith, Republicans killed this bill because Donald Trump wanted to use it as a wedge issue. Anyone, Chad, if you're watching, if any centrist tells you that there was a multivariate reason for this, they're lying their ass off. It would have had enough support to make it through. Maybe not every Republican would have voted for it, but it had enough Republican support to make it through until Trump said he wanted to use it as a wedge issue. Since then, McConnell, Lindsey Graham, they have come out and said the reason it didn't pass is because our nominee for president didn't want us to do anything. They've gone on the record. It's a dead issue. So the problem is that there is swing state polling. I don't know where it is now. This was like 2 months ago. Chris Murphy, one of the authors, was talking about it, that swing state voters who have a 15-point differential with Biden and Trump on the border, when they are informed about what Trump did to kill the bill, that collapses. So there are ways, I don't know how you possibly mass produce it on mass scale, but there are ways for Biden to close this gap. It's not impossible. And I think that's what this is, a Hail Mary play to get caught trying.
I don't think that there are enough people on the left that are fully appreciating what the issue actually is. The level of influx that we have at the border right now is unlike anything that we've ever seen before. Like, I think you can be pro-immigration, but recognize that the asylum laws as they were written back in, like, I think 67 was not, they didn't have this level of influx in mind. And so, like, if we don't do anything about the asylum law, if we don't reform that in some way, it's just what we're doing right now is just not, it's not tenable. And you have to a certain degree, I mean, you have to, I think Democrats can make the case that, you know, immigration is good. And to my knowledge, legal immigration has increased on Biden's watch from the Trump years, but also, like, recognize the need for reform. And the political pressure that the White House is facing right now is tremendous. When you have Democratic mayors from big cities that are outwardly taking these stances, you know, that does make conversations happen. And there's just no way that you can ignore that.
100%. And I just want to say, like, because this is the pushback I have in private, like, listen, I'm not happy about this EO. I wasn't even, I'll be honest with you, crazy about the bipartisan border bill, because it was much more conservative than progressive. The ratio of progressive provisos to conservative provisos was pretty lopsided. But I need Biden and the Democrats to win, so I have to deal with the hand I've been dealt.
This is the problem. You guys ever watch Better Call Saul?
Yeah,
of course.
The law is sacred. No, like, we're supposed to be in the situation where we're
Speak
saying,
for yourself, fucking officer of the court. None of us took that. Yeah.
No. Because I've heard, and I think you guys are in on it too, that the indictments against Trump are totally justified. They are in accordance with the law. We should follow the law. Everyone seems to agree that, I mean, none of you guys would be in favor of, like, stuffing ballots to elect Biden because we needed him for political reasons.
No,
I understand this is a difference of scale.
Yes.
I understand that. But all I'm trying to say is, if you go into an ambiguously legal situation. So, right, there can be some ambiguous legal things where, like, we have good arguments, they have good arguments, I'll do it and see where it ends up in the court. There's some legitimate areas to do that. But if you have the subjective intent, if it's true, if what Josiah is saying is true, and this was an effort to have it be struck down, what you're saying is you have the subjective intent of, I think what I'm doing is almost certainly illegal. And that's
how we get through it. Peace goes. We don't know until the courts strike it down. But
Sure.
we got to get to chat here. A couple of things, okay? So fuck. Is this guy on here? Okay.
So somebody was asking why it's not tenable. It's not.
Well, hang on.
tenable.
We'll play that in a second. I promise you, because
sure.
it's Brandon Clark. But this guy, I've been trying to get to him. So he's pushing back on. He's offering a complaint to Biden. He says, listen, because Biden has no red line. He never stands firm. Always give in. Ukraine, Russia, immigration, voting rights, student debt, minimum wage, no red line.
What?
I think he's talking about, like, when it comes to Biden issuing this executive order, he's caving to the right by walking back what he said before. And he says it's part of a pattern of Biden constantly giving in and never standing firm.
Well, so
I don't understand. What does that have to do with, like, Ukraine and student loan debt?
I mean,
Well,
it's just not true, right? Like, Biden, in his first 2 years, he said, look, we'll go it alone on giant $1 trillion spending packages if that's what it takes to get help to the American people. And that's exactly what he did with assorted issues, like the largest renewable energy investment in American history, obviously a huge stimulus package. You know, these were done with basically just all Democrats standing together and saying, look, we don't give a shit what the Republicans say. We're just going to do this because it's Democratic priorities, right? And he tried to do the same thing with things like the $15 hour minimum wage. But unfortunately, there were just, stupid rules in the Senate and stuff like that blocked him from doing that. But obviously,
can I say something on that though, Econoboy? That part on the student the minimum wage, because this is important. This is something where I had to be educated on, and I think it's an important distinction to make here. The meme is that Biden allowed the Senate parliamentarian to thwart the minimum wage proviso in the omnibus bill. Okay, that's the and Hutch and I think actually talked about this too. And
wait. Sorry, that's a minimum wage provision. A proviso is something that like, but just say it's provision.
Yeah, provision. Sorry. Okay, provision in the bill that basically they wanted to include it. They had the votes to do it. The parliamentarians said no.
They didn't have the votes though.
Right. Well, you're getting to the exactly.
Sorry.
But that is the meme understanding, and it's funny how your brain years back plays tricks on you. This is the common talking point. And I tricked myself into believing it. I'm like, that is fucking stupid. He should have told Schumer, kick that parliamentarian out, get a new one in who will do what the fuck he's told, and cram that motherfucker in. Hutch is correct, though. Biden could have done that by pressuring Schumer, but they didn't have the votes because was it Manchin and Sinema? Or was it? Yeah.
No, I agree. It's just that they talked about Biden specifically. Whereas, like, if Biden got everything he wanted, we would have had literally like 2.5 times the amount of social spending in the bills. Build Back Better, as originally proposed by Biden, was literally the most transformative investment in social insurance ever in the country's history, like barring the implementation of Social Security, right? So when people say, oh, Biden's not standing firm, this and that, like, again, it's kind of back to what you guys said earlier. Biden's not a dictator. Ultimately, Biden, if he got everything he wanted, we'd live in a much better society. But obviously, there's many different axes at play here, and sometimes you have to recognize that.
That's the thing, that there's an appetite for a benevolent dictator. It's across the spectrum. But there is an appetite on the left for someone who's just going to get in there. And I've heard, for example, and I'm sure you guys have heard the same, but I've heard people make the argument that Biden should have coerced Manchin to go along with whatever legislation he wanted to pass by threatening to prosecute his daughter or by threatening like IRS audits. I've heard people suggest this unironically, and they think this would have been the move, as though he wouldn't have switched parties fucking immediately and been on, the chairman of like 12 Republican subcommittees the next day.
Yeah, McConnell would have given his left arm for that.
Oh yeah, he would have.
The guy, by the way, is replying to you, Hutch, on Ukraine. He says, listen, at Ukraine, at first we refused to send the ammunition to Ukraine. Then he ended up doing it. Not allowing Ukraine to bomb inside Russia. He told Israel not to invade, Rafah, just for Israel to ignore.
Yeah. So
the red line on Rafah was not that they couldn't go into. The State Department clarified. They clarified back in March that the position was not that Israel can't go into Rafah, but Israel can't go into Rafah before they allow for mass evacuation. And what happened over the next 3 weeks? They evacuated 1 million people. So there's that.
A lot of some of these are genuine flip-flops. I think the tariffs are genuine flip-flops. I think the production of oil is a genuine flip-flop. And I don't see that as necessarily a bad thing. There are some things he stands firm on and some things he flip-flops on them when he sees what the right policy is or because circumstances change. In the face of the unprecedented kind of situation in Russia, Ukraine, or I guess it's precedented, but like a long time ago, and the large supply chain crunch, it totally made sense to alleviate that stress by producing oil and by expanding production of energy. That made sense. The international relations stuff, a lot of this is a song and dance. A lot of this is meant for you to consume it. Be very careful with the language that's being used here and the gamesmanship that's being played. And think about the Iran attack on Israel. I mean, I am not an expert, but there are a lot of people who think that was in some way coordinated to be a little weaker or a little bit for show, as opposed to an actual genuine whatever attack.
Right. They didn't want to escalate, but they felt that they had to respond to defend their sovereignty.
International relations is a peculiar kind of language, and the signaling done. And even now, as relates to Netanyahu and other people, a lot of times these signals are misinterpreted to be kind of red lines in the sand. And I don't think, as Hutch explained, that was ever that. And so just be careful about what you're interpreting and make sure it's a genuine flip-flop as opposed to kind of posturing.
Netanyahu is fucking intransigent. Is that the word I'm looking? He's
intransigent. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely not proviso. Fucking Pisco will correct you on that. Prick.
We're talking about a man who traveled to the United States to speak in front of Congress while Obama was negotiating the Iran deal. He does not give a fuck about, like, he views the Democrats as a hostile political party. He views them as a opposition party, and the idea
President
that
Clinton famously referred to on his first meeting with Netanyahu, he walked away saying, "Who the fuck is the superpower?
Who's the
around here?"
superpower? Exactly. Yeah. He's not somebody that you can. I mean, he can be influenced. They can influence him, but this idea that you can, wield him like a puppet is just not.
Well, no, but I also understand, again, as somebody who doesn't who's probably more conversant in foreign policy than the average American, but I'm by no means that's just not my milieu. I will say, I understand the frustration that people have about the notion, and this isn't just with Biden, this was the case with President Clinton and President Obama as well, this idea that Netanyahu has us on a leash and walks us. It actually, as somebody who's fairly progressive, awakes my American chauvinism, where I'm like, no, we are the superpower. You are not the superpower. You don't dictate terms to us. It is incredibly frustrating. And for that, among other reasons, I perfectly sympathize with the idea that Netanyahu should be checked in a meaningful way. And Biden comes off like a pussy.
Sure, I agree that I think at times he should have been more forceful. I just push back against the idea that he can just be manipulated to do whatever we want him to do.
Now, so Brandon Clark also wanted to push back, unless if you wanted to weigh in, Econoboy, but somebody else wanted to pick a fight with Hutch.
Yeah, no, I mean, to Hutch's point, it's just that restricting funds to Israel is a much smaller in scale to the idea that Biden could just implement Medicare for all, right? Like this is, we're talking like 1,000x on the impact of the country and economy. Now, obviously there's a lot more legal implications as well. So yeah, it's just, criticize Biden for things he actually has control over, give him a break for things that obviously there's a lot of things going on that lead to his decisions. So
one of those was the border until now. Until now was the border, and this is to get into the comment.
Speaking of the border,
Brandon Clark for months.
Can I read this? Can I read this comment though? So Brandon Clark says, and this was in response to Hutch, and I don't know where Pisco falls on this. You may be more sympathetic, or it may be a 2v1. But Brandon Clark says to Hutch, not tenable in what way? Undocumented immigrants through ITINS pay massively into Social Security and Medicare. Legal immigrants raise wages for U.S.-born workers. They both commit crimes at a lower level.
You don't need to sell me on immigration. I'm massively pro-immigration. I don't believe in open borders. I think very few people actually believe in open borders. I think there has to be some vetting system, and there has to be some sensible limit. And maybe we can disagree on what that is. But yeah, you don't need to disagree. You don't need to sell me on that. What's not tenable about the current situation is that there is an incredible amount of pushback from American voters on this issue. There's a tremendous appetite to do something to deal with this influx. The system as it was designed, when these statutes were passed, the asylum statutes, they did not envision this level of influx. So the system cannot withstand what is currently happening. And so there's not really any good solution until you reform that in some way. I would like to see way more immigration to this country. So again, I agree with you on that one, but it's not tenable because there's just this can't go on forever. It just can't. You're going to get creamed.
I want to violently agree with Hutch and then violently disagree with him.
I knew it. I knew this was going to throw a fucking grenade into it.
I'm going to violently agree that it's clear that the asylum system is not functioning as it should with respect to the influx, unless you think the asylum system should be the kind of door through which all kinds of wanted immigration should go through. Or, I mean, this is a question I might ask the whole panel, and I don't know what answer I'll get actually, but I'll ask it now, and then I want to continue what I want to say. It's just, do you think that only people who are qualified for asylum should receive asylum?
You mean meeting the bare minimum requirement?
You should only receive asylum if you actually deserve asylum under the laws and precedent of the United States.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So there are some people.
Wait, Econoboy, I don't know if there's a trap. You didn't respond. Did I walk into a trap?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not familiar with what the checklist of things are to actually receive asylum. One thing that I struggle with explaining to a lot of people is that people will say these aren't really asylum seekers. They're just people seeking a much better life for their family. And it's well, I don't know, man. That feels like as reasonable a reason to immigrate as any other reason I've ever heard of, right? Oh, I don't want to immigrate not because I'm being politically persecuted, but because my country is incredibly corrupt and the economy is terrible. it seems reasonable to me. You know? I mean,
Yeah,
so
but asylum's
use
a
that in
specific
myself.
thing. It's about persecution or a well-founded fear of persecution. And
Yeah.
Right,
and,
right.
and so it was for a specific thing. What you're saying is, yeah, it's bad. We should have you anyway. That's the kind of well, I just want to say this is the violently agreeing part of what Hutch says. I actually don't think that the asylum laws were structured around that kind of immigration. And I think the solution, as Hutch is saying, is maybe better processing for actual asylum claims and other pathways for the other desirable immigrants for work and stuff that he's referencing. All of that,
Yeah.
I think, beautifully said by Hutch. Very, very awesome. Here's the part I violently disagree with. It sounds like, Hutch, what you're saying is it's an issue because people think it's an issue. And Democrats should onboard it because people say it. And that is one of like, now it's, I think 2 or 3 times, I can't point to them directly, that I've heard on this panel a little bit like, well, we should just kind of do it because politics says so, or because the people are demanding it as opposed to us thinking there's any genuine policy.
That's a part of it.
But that doesn't sound like leadership on policy. It doesn't sound like that. What's driving us is that we have the right ideas. It sounds like, okay, we'll, assuage the fears of what MAGA, of people who are being unreasonable.
It's not just MAGA though. It's not just.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's get to those issues. Let's get to those issues.
Yeah.
I think that there are some problems with a bunch of illegal immigration. Maybe not necessarily. I mean, there's a good point, I guess, in the bottom there that on the net, we don't see the kind of society destroying issues that the right are saying, but there are like absolutely immediate fiscal consequences for not for the federal government, but for certain places. Obviously, there's security risks if we don't know who's in here. There's problems of trafficking. There's a bunch of other things that you're not considering when you only think about like the global net.
Alex Narasta, he put it best. He's from the Cato Institute. He's their head of economic studies, essentially, is his title, I think. And he says something along the lines of, like, people don't want to liberalize when they perceive chaos. When people perceive chaos, they want to illiberalize, right? They want to constrain things. They want to militarize things. And so the best thing that you can do with the border from a liberal perspective, obviously, is try to advocate for, I mean, the people who are currently here, that's a whole different quandary, honestly. I'm not even sure politically what the right thing to do is there. But in terms of like what would be the most popular, like what people even want. But when it comes to the asylum process, it seems like the obvious answer is, like Hutch said, expand greatly the number of immigration judges. That way people aren't in legal limbo for several years at a time. But then also greatly expand opportunity for legal immigration. One of the reasons why the asylum process has exploded in terms of people coming is that a lot of immigrants have, rightly discovered that the easiest way to get here is just to claim asylum, right? And why the fuck would I go through all this incredibly lengthy bullshit of a process legally immigrating here when the legal process for seeking asylum, I can just do that instead, right? And so obviously that's a big problem. So
I'm not wonky enough to tell you what the solution is. I'm just saying the asylum laws as they were written led us to this moment. And the moment that we're in right now is that the influx is way too much for the system to handle. And so something needs to be done. I think you can address that in a meaningful way and still be like pro-immigration. You can still advocate for more immigrants coming into the country. It's just, that's what I mean when I say it's not tenable. The system is buckling under the pressure.
And I agree with that.
That's not just MAGA propaganda. That's just, it is. Yes. Yeah.
I agree with that. I think the system is broken. I think it's a resource problem, all the things you're saying. And I think the answer isn't there's a reason why asylum as a process is allows you to like go through all the bars on usual immigration. So usually if you cross the border without inspection and admission, you're ineligible for all kinds of adjustments of status. But asylum is like one of the loopholes where even if you cross the border illegally, you're allowed to apply for it. There's a reason that we have those international obligations historically. And I think the way that you combat this big flow of illegitimate asylum and also to allow for the kind of good immigration we want in an orderly fashion is to massively overhaul the immigration system and increase the amount of funding for immigration judges to process bogus claims faster.
So I want to turn to the economy, but before I do, T. Maggie says, why do we give Republicans a pass, though? They have just as much obligation to work in good faith to resolve this. And if it's a crisis, they fail just as much as Democrats.
I don't give them a fucking
no pass at all.
I don't give them a pass.
They're primarily responsible, I would say, for their I mean, there's so many immigration issues in which there's bipartisan agreement. To say nothing of DACA, increased funding. Those are things that everyone should agree with. But I think that it is, as Josiah said, it's being used as a political football to the benefit or the perceived benefit of Donald Trump.
Yeah, and that's why I think this is the perennial issue. This is the problem with Democrats, the burden that they have. I constantly equate it to a three-legged race. We have two parties in this country who exist in a duopoly. Politics is a three-legged race, and I understand that three-legged races are complicated, right? Sometimes you go at different speeds or whatever. It's a struggle for a reason. But in this three-legged race of politics, the Republican Party has just dropped to the ground and is hugging our leg, trying to stymie any progress. And it's really hard to make progress. All I'll say is I can't speak for the others, although I'm pretty confident that they'll agree with me. But just to answer that, for me, I do blame, like, that's my whole fucking raison d'etre. That my entire channel is about how much the GOP sucks. There is no issue on which the GOP has more credibility than the Democratic Party. And I do think it's annoying as shit. That's why I despise enlightened centrists when they grade these two parties on a curve. On its very worst day, the Democratic Party in 2024 is better than the Republican Party on its very best day. And there's no contest. So unless anybody has an issue with that, I do want to get into Econoboy's issue. Okay.
Hey, wait, can we talk? There was a big thing that happened today, or did I get Facebooked? Can you tell me about the petrodollar? Econoboy?
Yeah, Econoboy.
There was like an agreement signed with Nixon that expired a couple days ago, and now a bunch of people are saying it's going to destroy the dollar on the global stage. Or did I get Facebooked?
It sounds like you may have gotten Facebooked. I think anybody, yeah, I mean anybody who there's always like it's weird because it seems like I feel like with conspiracy theorists there are like certain things that people latch on to, like 9/11, or for some reason drinking baby blood's been a thing that the conspiracy meta has come up. The petrodollar is one of those things, and like the dollar reserve currency is one of those things that like economic conspiracy theorists, it's like the dollar's going to collapse any day now. Put all your money in gold, buy guns. Like, it's like, I don't know. It seems like things are kind of just trugging along just fine. So I think things will work out. So
it was very convincing, the tweets that I saw.
That's fair.
So with the notion of the economy under President Biden, kind of like to lead us off here, I saw this Financial Times article, and this is not a catch-all, by the way, because I feel like there's so much fucking to talk about, and we'll let Econoboy lead. But the thing that triggered it was, according to a poll, Joe Biden cuts Donald Trump's lead on handling of U.S. economy. Donald Trump has lost some of his edge over President Biden on the economy in a monthly poll of American voters, one of the first signs that months of strong economic data may finally be boosting the president's reelection prospects. And so, Econoboy, I don't know if this is sufficient launch pad for you. I don't even know where you want to go with this. I feel there's a lot to fucking talk about because according to professional pollsters, the thing I've been told time and time again is that the economy is reliably the single most important polling issue in every presidential election without fail. Would you like to weigh in on any of this?
Yeah.
I think I'll take this one, actually. No, go ahead.
Yeah.
No, I don't think there's ever been a president who was reelected during a recession or during like general economic instability. And of course, that's because that's probably the most important thing on people's minds. There was for instance, there was a chart that was making the rounds on Twitter several weeks ago, and it was like a issue prioritization by age and party identification, all these things, and things that we would, things that us, very involved in politics people might take very seriously, things like Israel-Palestine, the environment, these things all ranked pretty low. The top issues were like inflation, the economy broadly, gas prices, stuff like that. And so that's always the number one issue, at least by my judge of things. And, in terms of why Republicans have consistently pulled ahead of Democrats in the last maybe 15 or 20 years on handling of the economy. Part
Greatest
of that
trick the devil ever pulled there.
Honestly, yeah. I mean, part of that might just be, I guess that the Republicans have a significantly more intuitive economic message, which is like, cut taxes, give your money back to you. Isn't that better? And regulations are stupid and the government sucks at everything. But that's all part of what I think of as a kind of a long-term plan of, and this is where the Democrats can turn it around on the Republicans to say, look, the reason why you think welfare sucks is because Republicans made welfare suck, right? That was like their goal, was to make all these systems. The reason you think the USPS sucks is because the Republicans made it suck, right? Like these are things that they've purposefully done, and you can point to very specific regulations over time, which seem to indicate that. And another reason why the gap between Biden and Trump might be closing is just because people's expectations and their general economic sentiment kind of lags inflation let's say elevated inflationary periods. Like, for instance, when you look at the last period of like elevated inflation under Jimmy Carter, it seemed like people took about 6 months to kind of really feel that inflation had gotten under control. And that's kind of what you're seeing now. If you map on the Michigan consumer sentiment with inflation, people are kind of realizing that inflation's under control now. It just, takes about 6 months, which is to say, maybe there's some pretty good headwinds over the next several months, assuming the economy maintains its course. People will probably just continue to get more and more positive on it. So
didn't the Fed just say that they're going to continue with the interest rates as they are?
I think they signaled maybe one rate cut this year. And, truthfully speaking, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, rates are not even that high, right? It's just that we went 10 or 15 years with 0% interest rates. And so the economy, is not necessarily used to that. I was talking to a guy who works in the mortgage industry. I thought it was an interesting thing. It was like, this guy, he had 12 years of experience in the mortgage industry. This is when COVID happened. He had gone 12 years, his entire career, with two things being true. Interest rates were zero, and there had been no basically instability in the housing market, because he started like in 2011, and it was, he started in like 2009, and then the housing recovery started, and then it was 2020, and then housing got even better for the next 2 years until rates started going up. And so, it just, people get used to certain things, and the increase in rates doesn't really seem to be hurting the economy as much as people thought. So
some things about the economy that I find fascinating with how they lace with politics is, and again, I'm just imagining as a cynic, that Donald Trump's going to win the election. And I know, based on polling data, and I know you know this too, what's going to happen a month into his presidency with the macroeconomic trends being exactly the same. Republicans are going to start saying this is the greatest economy ever built. They're going to, I saw a tweet, and I was looking for it, that if you just took the name off the presidency, like you just described the macroeconomic indicators, any presidential candidate would be desperate to run on this economy. But it does seem, and perhaps, like, again, my mind's playing tricks on me, perhaps I'm forgetting about things. I don't think I've ever seen the public so resistant to accept the indicators. I don't recall this under Trump. I don't recall it under Biden. I don't remember it under Bush. And maybe I'm just reading too much of Will Stansel, but it does seem like the vibes, what they call it, the vibe session or whatever, it seems like it's stronger now than it ever was. What do you think about that? Yeah. Or what do any of you think about that? I've never seen it quite like this before.
Social media. That's what I think.
It's all vibes all the way down. I mean, that's the truth, honestly, for a lot of these things. And perception, in a way, is reality. I don't really take to heart the people who say that the economy is in the shitter right now, or because that's how they feel. And I know it's not like based on anything. And I know that if, like you said, if it were Trump, they would take responsibility and credit for it. But it's hard to argue with that. I mean, what can you do?
It's tough when it's like, wasn't it like, there was some poll that came out recently. Wasn't it like 70% of the country thinks that we're currently in a recession?
And that we're in a fucking recession. And that Biden has lost more jobs than created. And
a lot of these people, well, most of these people probably, lived through the 2008 housing crash, when millions of people lost their mortgages. They had their 401ks wiped out, lost their jobs. So for so many people to have gone through that, to have experienced like a real recession, and then to experience what we were experienced, which is like uncomfortable high inflation for sure, but nowhere near 2008 levels. That's a little disheartening. It's like, well, how the hell do you combat that? Like, how do you push back against that?
It's so easy to make that pitch too. It's like, someone who's struggling. You know it. I know it. We all know it. Like,
it must be everybody is. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, because everyone has an anecdote, and I think if you look at the numbers for people who consider their own situation and say, we're doing good, or we're even doing better than we expected, or something to that effect, the numbers aren't bad at all. And it shows that the people are actually pretty genuinely happy with where they are personally. But there's this perception that's kind of, it's definitely there with prices, because prices are something visible that everyone sees. It's not like some of these other indicators like GDP growth, okay. Not a normal person isn't going to be able to see that necessarily. And maybe even some other macroeconomic indicators, amount of debt or whatever. No one really sees that as much. But the price story is a compelling one. And if you sort of tie it together with the recent COVID anxiety, it's compelling. You think people are doing well under Biden's economy, really? And if you just put that message in there, I think it sells.
But I mean, unless Conboy wants to say something, I'll be honest with you. Here's the problem. And I can say this because I'm not running for office. There is obviously a lot of anxiety out there. There's a lot of sincere anxiety out there because, again, it's not like prices are at pre-pandemic levels, and they're never going to be, right? There's no question about that. But the polls also suggest to me that in some ways, maybe not for everybody, but that partisanship is a major factor in this. I mean, Paul Krugman talks about this nonstop, and that's why I meant at the beginning. There is a substantial portion of the people who are right now bitching about the economy. The second Trump is inaugurated, will start to change their tunes because a Republican is in office. And these people are just full of shit. They're just dishonest, full of shit, partisan losers. And I don't know what to do about. I'm sorry, Conboy, go ahead. I just want to make that point.
No, that was funny. No, I mean, consumer sentiment seems to be tracking basically CPI pretty closely, and I think that's a lot of it. I mean, it's just that again, like one of the things I talked about, the guy who works in mortgages who had basically like very little volatility, 0% interest rates for a long time. Well, I mean, there's at this point now, there's 2 generations of Americans who have never experienced elevated inflation, right? I mean, basically since, what was it, like the mid 1980s or something, inflation's been very moderate, very low, very controlled. And so, you've got a lot of people who have just a lot of sticker shock and who've never experienced anything like that. And people are resentful of it because, naturally when prices go up, even if your wages go up, there's certainly a behavioral effect to that happening. And then to what you're saying as well, Josiah, obviously you can look at their sentiment surveys sentiment surveys that bisect your partisan identifier, right? So Democrat, Republican, Independent, or whatever. And literally you can look at when a Republican takes office. Yeah, it just completely switches. It seems like there's about, 25, 30, not even that low. There's probably about 50% of people in the Democratic and Republican sort of partisan partisan identifiers, which is to say about 15% of people on both sides in terms of aggregate population, that just literally just switch their opinion based on who's in office within a very short period of time. And I was watching a podcast, 538 has their own podcast. They had a couple of economists on that also did consumer sentiment polling. And they talked about how not only were Democrats and Republicans, to be fair, both partisan on their understanding of how the economy is actually going, depending on who's the government in charge currently. What they did say was that Republicans are much more sensitive to who is in charge currently. And the way that they described it was that Republicans cheer louder and they boo harder, right? And Democrats are a little bit more moderate on, how they feel about the economy. But of course, it's, how can it not be vibes, right? When you ask people how their financial situation is, it's like, oh yeah, people's financial situation, unbelievably good. Those surveys, it blows all expectations out of the water. But at the same time, those same people are saying the economy's bad. Well, you can't have a situation where everyone's saying their financial situation is good, and at the same time the economy is in the shitter, right?
Because then you've created the national economy at that point. Yeah. So I just want to say real quick. Okay, says Josiah is the biggest partisan hack. Listen, unapologetically, I will never, ever, ever create a false equivalence between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. If that makes me a hack because I recognize that one of the two parties is just objectively better than the other, then fucking sign me up. And you are welcome at any time, sir or madam, to come into this chat.
Speak on it.
We can have that conversation. You will lose the argument every time because my party is better than yours. Just want to put that out there.
Speak on it.
Part of the reason why this will get better, I think, is that I think Democrats were rightfully sensitive to just saying the economy was good, especially when inflation was really high, right? Because there were some people who were saying, oh no, even though inflation's really high, the economy's really, really good. Look at all these different things and look at all Biden's economic accomplishments. However, that probably wouldn't have played super well in the midst of 9% inflation. But as we get into disinflation, with 2-3% inflation, and we get into the campaign season, I think the Democrats will have a much better, much more stable ground to make their economic case. And so, Biden it seems like they've been hesitant to really super duper espouse their economic platform.
Okay, can I ask you all about it?
Wow. I
Well,
mean,
no.
he ran-
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Hutch. No, please.
Okay,
thank
it's
you.
just gonna be real quick. I will say I think one of the stupidest things that Biden has done was the whole Bidenomics thing. Was so
Are you
stupid.
shitting me? That is one of the
Wait,
best
what?
brands of all time.
No, bro, that was it was just the worst time to do that. And I even if he had a point, even if we were struggling better than every other like industrialized nation, like when he rolled out that slogan, it was just like, what are you doing, bro?
What do you want him to do? I mean, he's trying to get the
Wait,
middleman of
dude,
America.
if you would have done Bidenomics now, it would have been fine. He did it like a year and a half ago. It was like, what are you doing?
Listen, honestly, you remember those fucking Biden stickers that they were posting on gas pumps? I did that. Okay.
They were posting or we were posting?
No, we were not posting. That's the problem. Because what Biden should have done, Biden should have taken a page out of Trump's book. And the next time, because I don't know if the government is still doing this, but the federal government was sending out COVID tests or whatever. I don't even know if that service is still there. It should include an "I did that" sticker, and it's like stick this wherever you want.
Wait, to Hutch's point, wasn't that cringe when like Donald Trump signed every single COVID check that went out?
It was brilliant politics. I mean, of course it was demeaning. Of course it was petty. Of course it was beneath the office.
You're a hack.
That's why. Pisco.
So you're a hack.
Pisco, I need you.
I mean, I don't know what to
He
say.
fucking made you, bro.
Pisco. Can I ask you something? Do you think the president of the United States should be calling people losers?
Sometimes if they're being a loser, yeah.
Okay. See, I think you're a fucking hack. I think 5 years ago, you would have never said, if someone's like, hey, do you think the president, pre-Trump, you would have never conceived of a president of the United States using such crass, denigrating language.
Do you remember when Obama like called Kanye West an asshole? You think that I was
that was a hot mic. That was a fucking hot mic. Don't even
said, to be clear, he called him an ass, not an asshole.
Yeah.
Sorry.
The second is very,
and by the way,
much more.
And by the way, he caught so much shit from that. But my point is, the fucking standards change. Do I wish we lived in a world where there was a regality, a consistent, good faith, reciprocated regality?
I take your point.
Yes,
I take your
do.
point.
Thank you.
So listen,
Trump signed it. Biden should be putting his fucking name on everything. Biden should be calling it Biden's United States of America. That should be on the goddamn letterhead.
Jesus Christ,
yeah, Biden is doing something which I'm very impressed with in all seriousness, which is when the bipartisan infrastructure funds are distributed, there's a fucking sign that goes up, courtesy of President Joe Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law. That is objectively the right thing to do in this political climate.
Next on Pondering Politics, we'll talk about how the Trumpism is a cult of personality.
What would you like from me?
I just think you're going a little bit. I get it. I understand the sentiment. I
get it, but you're also dead wrong.
There's a difference between like having some good faith back and forth and being like Hunter Biden should be my dad. Like there's a difference in how you're approaching. I think that there's like some aesthetic choices that I'm okay with the president being like a cool guy and like not having an inflated ego all the time. But that's just me.
I want my president to be a cool guy.
Credit.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say there's nothing wrong with like I didn't have I know that Democrats, obviously both sides make a big deal about every little thing that each side does. Obviously, I didn't have a huge problem with Donald Trump signing the checks or whatever. I mean, obviously, like I don't know, much like most Americans, I just got direct deposit, so I didn't even see a signed check. So I'm not sure if it made a big deal. But like obviously, I don't think there's anything wrong with the president forcefully taking credit for the things that he actually did, right? And so I mean, when we're talking about the infrastructure bill, obviously that kind of makes sense. Now that there's a difference between that and like for instance, I think I want to say it was a Democrat in Florida who did this. There's like the Florida commissioner of whatever the fuck, and basically this person's job who got elected, they were in charge of I want to say it was like energy management policy, and this included retail gas station regulation. And so something that she tried to do was basically just make it to where her name and photo was at every single pump. But it's like, well, this isn't really a policy. This isn't like a thing you're taking credit for. It's just like you're just trying to advertise yourself, essentially, right? But those are
his eyes. Like I want Joe Biden to put his picture of him at the rave or where was he? Oh,
look, if Biden,
no, we can't do that. We just let Donald Trump and MAGA do whatever they want. We play by Marquis of Queensberry rules.
I think it would be funny to put Biden on the $20 bill, and I would support it if he did that. It'd be hilarious. But there's a line, of course. But I think Biden's saying I did that. to infrastructure.
Put him on
projects,
every.
you know, make-
I
put him
think
on every
Michelle
bill.
Obama, by the way, I didn't realize, but apparently she's been masquerading as Peace Code this entire time, that when we go, or they go low, we go high. Well, thank you, Madam First Lady. I believe
You
in
don't
playing.
agree with that?
No, of course I
Yeah.
don't. Listen, this isn't the West Wing, bro. This isn't the if you listen. I'll tell you what, Pisco. Let's just do it. Let's just do it. I'll
Society's
tell
ready
you
to
what.
start an
Yeah,
actual
I
limbo
will-
competition.
I will
between both
listen.
parties.
Listen, I think you should lay out how us playing civility politics and not engaging in any of the sort of petty partisan, like Biden
I'm okay
shouldn't-
with Petty. Listen. I'm okay with Petty. I'm okay with him calling him a convicted criminal. I'm okay with him going to the fucking court and saying this guy's a fucking convicted criminal. Look at this loser. He's falsifying business records. That's all chill with me. Okay. The problems I have are like when we start to get a little cult of personality and be like, this is me with the Biden hat, put his like face on everything. That's number one. He didn't quite say that, but you were approaching it. And number two is I notice the kind of similar rationale to these kind of aesthetic choices is sort of the same kind of rationale behind the, oh, maybe it's okay for him to break the asylum law because it plays good and, you know, tit for tat. Trump did a bunch of fucked up things at the border, and so he's allowed to do it. That's where I don't want to get. Like, I'm not going to follow Biden into the break the law on purpose kind of situation. I'm not saying that's what happened, but
we're not even.
there's
nothing,
limits. There's limits.
Nothing about the president. There's nothing about Joe Biden.
Okay,
putting
sign
his
the
name on
checks.
checks
You've convinced
or
me. Sign the check.
That is breaking the law.
Okay, all right.
Because here's the thing: if you ask, and focus groups discuss this, there are cohorts of Americans in swing states who still remember. You still hear. It's not anecdotal. This is something that recurs in focus groups. Donald Trump gave me money because he signed his fucking name on the check.
Well, he signed the bill as well. You would give Biden credit for that as well, wouldn't you? If he signed
they didn't get a copy of the goddamn bill. They didn't get a copy. That's what I'm saying. I need Democrats to do shit that isn't illegal.
Okay.
That the norm has already been breached. And here's where you and I disagree.
Uh-huh.
I think a norm's value erodes when it's not reciprocal.
Yeah.
I'm not obligated to adhere to a different standard than you if we're peers in this political system. I may choose not to go to some depths as you, but if you call me a loser, I have every fucking right to call you a loser in return. There has to be a flavor of reciprocity.
You can call Trump a loser. I'm sure I have before as well.
I think you have a couple of times.
Yeah.
But Biden has to do things, I think, to make the case for his agenda. And this is the question I wanted to get to before you derailed me with your nonsense.
Sorry.
Before you triggered me.
Before you go there, I have
Yeah.
to go make dinner for me and my fiance. I'm the cook in the house. So
I understand. I'll tell you what, let me just wrap up with this then. Here's a
Okay.
question. Let's revisit it next week.
I don't want to shit if you guys want to keep going.
No, it's fine because I think this should be a 4-man show. This is the whole point. I just want to say when it comes to touting accomplishments, be they economic or otherwise, it seems like there's a divided camp on this, which is I've heard some people, including not just far left progressives, but like the guys on Pod Save America who worked for President Obama. They're as lib can get. And what they say is it is insensitive and useless to try to talk about your accomplishments to any meaningful degree. You need to talk about what you'll do in the future. And my position is if I voted for you and you don't tell me what you did with my vote the last time, why the fuck should I just vote aspirationally for you the next time? It's got to be both, right? And I would love to know what you all think about that. And if you guys want, we can talk about it at a different during our next conversation. But what ratio should be talking about accomplishments versus aspirational, agenda for the next term?
50-50. That's a good number for me. I think 50-50. And I want to say, first of all, thanks everyone for coming to do this. And thank you, Pondering, Josiah, for hosting, and Hutch and Econoboy. I'm excited to see Econoboy's face for the first time next week, although I'm sad to see the ego. But I think this is once we figure out the tech issues.
We're doing a face reveal?
Oh, I think he is, right? I think he is.
This
God.
Sunday on
if you're not
the
handsome.
Three Wonks. This Sunday on the Three Wonks with Josiah. We'll be talking Supreme Court reform the entire time. That's on the Three Wonks YouTube channel. And it will also include, like, you come for the Econoboy face reveal, you stay for the policy discussion on the Supreme Court. At least that's my, that's what I would hope to be the case.
It's a good pitch.
Oh my God. Is this the Twitter reply guy? By the way, Pisco, have you ever run into this where Twitter reply guys will follow you to YouTube chats but never
Yeah.
want to engage?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure this is a Twitter reply guy that I don't have him on block. I just ignore him.
I don't block
Yeah.
him.
I'll never do that. Yeah.
We have to let
So
Hutch go
fun.
though, right?
Yeah, no, guys, seriously, I appreciate this. This was a lot of fun. This was a rough draft. We'll have a smoother setup next time. But
Perhaps
I think
a
it
new
went
name.
extremely well. A new name, yeah. We're currently
Perhaps.
brainstorming that. Hutch,
Give us
when you're at
suggestions.
dinner with your, did you say your wife or fiance?
She's my wifey. Oh yeah,
Why
she's
try
my
to label
fiance.
things?
You guys could brainstorm some sort of title for this.
His eyes over here, like, when are you guys having kids?
Yeah.
It's been
I don't
long.
know. I don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like how long? When's your anniversary exactly? And what should we send as a gift? But no, listen, I appreciate this, guys. This was a lot of fun. Let's do this.
Yeah,
again,
thanks for organizing it and doing all the graphics and everything.
Absolutely. Appreciate it, fellas. All right, guys, follow everybody on everybody's live streams and channels and everything. And this will be a weekly recurring thing, 7:30 Eastern.